Chapter 967. Luo Nan stuck a polite tail under Zhang Yingying's offensive of rolling her eyes. Then he continued to explain, the reason for this phenomenon is because I used my soul strength to bestow them with a basic and identical reaction pattern. Let me explain the logic behind this. We ultimately want to simulate the nature of the life layer, so we will make it relatively complex. However, it will be crude and random. After all, I don't know what the sand will look like after it evolves into the life solvent. I can only fabricate it out of thin air. Therefore, the structure of the blessing will be a bit abstract and conceptual. The structure embodies the focus on the reaction acuity of the individual. It increases the viscosity of the interference between them, giving them ample opportunities to react. It's a bit similar to magnets. Two forces of attraction and repulsion will form as their spatial state changes. The basic structure is like this. Luo Nan condensed water vapor as he spoke, drawing a concrete diagram in the air. The rules were unfamiliar. It was clearly the product of configuration thinking. It made the scalp of an outsider swell. Luo Nan gave it a qualitative description. This is the basic unit that we are able to divide into. Zhang Yingying mumbled, this isn't friendly. Do you need to make it so professional? Luo Nan glanced at her. There's no other way. Back then, Brother Papercut gave me the material condition of a talisman paper processed by Master Gao. It is active and has a stronger direction. What I have here is sand, so I need to do some processing in advance. Let me emphasize again, I did this rather casually. I randomly chose a reaction structure of a miniature individual and gave it a boost. This was artificially designed for the convenience of the experiment. In real life, the result of the segmentation wouldn't be so neat. Wow! Di Weiwu's eyes went perfectly round. He gasped in surprise, Uncle Papercut, so that little paper man of yours is actually this complicated. Excuse me. Papercut's words were so true that they made him cry. Luo Nan's method was indeed carried out according to the basic principle of soul activation. It was to interfere as much as possible with this basic logic. Back then, the Xia City branch had sent him to teach Luo Nan this technique because they valued it as a typical example of the interference between the mental and the material. However, normal ability users, including Papercut, would never be able to be like Luo Nan, giving every grain of sand a basic reaction pattern, no matter how meticulous they were. This was equivalent to making thousands of blessings in an instant. Even if it was simple and repeated in batches, when accumulated to a certain number, the difficulty would naturally rise to an insurmountable level. Papercut was quite self-aware. Even if he sent 10 or 100 people like him, it would be impossible for him to reach Luo Nan's level. Luo Nan, who was thousands of kilometers away, seemed to sense Papercut's state of mind. He faced the camera and spoke in a gentle tone. Under the logic of soul activation, we need to do our best to provide an adequate and necessary environment. Then we will bestow the environment with regulations and the logic of sensing changes. However, this is only research. It is screening. It is a deliberately created ideal state. Even so, he might have to conduct tens of thousands of simulations before he could seek a probabilistic result. In actual combat, we definitely have to choose the simplest and most effective structure. Of course, this is within the limits of the target's own physical properties. All of this will require the accumulation of daily experiments. Luo Nan was trying to comfort her. But why did it make people want to cry even more? Papercut thought about his daily life, the handicraft shop he ran and the gaudy display cabinets for Papercut craftsmanship. His entire person didn't feel good. Luo Nan turned to Zhang Yingying in the live broadcast. What do you want? Zhang Yingying was still in a dizzy state. She was stunned for half a second before waking up. I choose. Can I choose? I told you. I just gave them a basic reaction structure, giving them basic activity. As manipulators, we still need to bestow them with a few regulations. We need to give them a corresponding stimulation. It's like doing breeding experiments. We need to see how resistant the flora is to certain drugs. Now that you say it like this, I suddenly understand a bit. Zhang Yingying was a smart person. She had listened to Luo Nan's explanations and introductions several times before. She was immediately enlightened by a few specific examples. You're doing bacteria screening. More or less. It's just that we're screening superconfigurations that are built upon the foundation of tangible matter. It's a kind of incorporeal system framework. Are we looking to see who is more efficient? Well, you mean to say that we should make them a whole system, sand creatures? Yes, that's what I mean, but it's just a simulation. Simulation. You want me to be a game designer? Let me think about it. Zhang Yingying lowered her head to look at the beach. Speaking of which, the quality of the sand on Zeolite Beach was excellent. It was fine and pure. It was only when piled together that it revealed a faint golden luster. The feeling of stepping on it with bare feet should be quite good. Unfortunately, none of the people present had the leisure to do so. Zhang Yingying muttered to herself irresolutely. She simply crouched down and grabbed a handful of fine sand that hadn't received any interference from the outside of the boiling sand soup. She let it flow through the gaps between her fingers. Gradually, she got the feeling, it's a bit soft, but it's quite malleable. Maybe we need a fellow that can transform. Oh, we need to increase its stickiness and malleability. Luo Nan casually gestured in the air. He wasn't just messing around. He was making additions, deletions, and corrections based on the simple configuration of the condensation of water vapor. Illusory yet clear lines and diagrams condensed and danced on his fingertips. Don't follow his train of thought by all means. You'll die. Zhang Yingying squinted her eyes and looked a few times. Then she forced herself to return to being the client. She wholeheartedly raised her request, don't think about hardness. But we can do a bit of work on the unloading force. Luo Nan expressed his understanding, it's conductive. When necessary, it can dissipate and reassemble for a short period of time. What about the attack power? Are we going to pounce over and suffocate people to death? This can't be considered for now. The conversation on the beach continued. The style of the scene looked quite normal. However, there were a few people who were forced to watch from all over the world who resented injustice. Their emotions were provoked to become increasingly irritable and fragile. This adulterous couple. Another person slammed the table in the video conference setting. There was also a person complaining on the other side, that sure Xinhe. Did they let him do the experiment? And Hood. Didn't he know how to give a word of warning? Such a crucial camera position is wasted just like that. Of course, there was no lack of poisonous tongues among the participants. Their poisonous tongues grew stronger in their leisure time. Even if we keep it normal, gentlemen, are you sure that the normal level of your brain matches the scene of the live broadcast? The video conference nearly turned into a battle of wills. In the end, there were still some people, such as Bald Jeff and Director Mao, who grew more and more interested the more they watched. Right now, the main focus of the live broadcast was on Luo Nan. It could be seen that as Zhang Yingying's request became more and more specific, Luo Nan's water vapor configuration became more and more complex. But when the composition structure reached a certain degree of complexity, Luo Nan would begin to subtract. He would be stingy here and subtract there. After a few rounds, he would reach a relatively concise degree. Then he would begin to add layers upon layers. This is a type of optimization method. It's an extremely high-level operation. Bald Jeff made an assertion, there must be some sort of formula in the depths of his heart. It doesn't matter if it's symbolic or purely graphical. It can follow a fixed rule to offset the redundant parts and transform them. The accumulated structure can be upgraded and transformed. This is a high level of integration. A high level of evolution of knowledge. Director Mao still liked to converse with professionals. He let his secretary refill his cup of coffee, but his eyes never left the live broadcast from beginning to end. Can you see the theoretical context? Is there a concrete basis? Bold Jeff could only shrug. Perhaps Instructor Li Wei can provide a better explanation. However, did you discover anything else? It's just a guess. I feel that Luo Nan shouldn't have been exposed to it for too long. Look at him. He was a bit hesitant at first. He wasn't proficient in using it. But the more he practiced, the more fluent he became. This is the accumulation of skill proficiency. It's not something that can be explained by a so-called genius. In other words, he certainly has something to rely on. There's no need to mention the last sentence of nonsense. Director Mao swirled the cup of coffee that was half full, letting the thick black liquid imitate the small piece of boiling beach. But in the end, he didn't get any results from the swirling. In the end, he could only sigh, what a pity. There's no way to cut open his head for now. Luo Nan didn't know that there was a certain big shot extraordinary who was extremely interested in his head right now. Moreover, this wasn't really news. He made a series of calculations with full concentration. Only after 3 or 4 rounds of calculations was he barely satisfied. Right now, the condensation of the water vapor into a configuration was more or less unrecognizable. Luo Nan's gaze rotated back and forth between the configuration and the sand. It seemed that he was considering how to proceed. In the end, he said to Zhang Yingying, "You're up next." Me? In the end, they aren't living things. They're simulated spirituality. They don't have any power of their own, so they need the support of external energy. Plus, I still need to maintain a bit of objectivity as much as possible. Zhang Yingying blinked her eyes. She was a bit eager to give it a try, but she was still worried. Can I do it? Isn't this operation a bit too meticulous? Relax. The framework is set up. You're just a human-shaped battery. Zhang Yingying gave Luo Nan the middle finger outside of the camera, but she still obediently followed Luo Nan's instructions. Step by step, she carefully took over the control. During this time, Luo Nan gave the sand a second round of support. He made adjustments to their initial reaction framework. Every time he carried out a fine adjustment, he would list the relevant configuration changes in the air in the form of condensation of water vapor. Okay, there weren't many people who could understand this, but the attitude was there, right? At the same time, he encouraged Zhang Yingying, don't be nervous. I told you that they already have a set pattern. You don't need to expend any effort at all. You just need to maintain a stable output of energy. Oh, you can even experience it up close, Zhang Yingying exclaimed in the next second, wow. Chapter 968. Zhang Yingying's facial expression wasn't shown in the live broadcast, but the curiosity of nearly everyone in the audience turned into cat claws as she cried out. They stuck out from their throats, digging into their throats. Luckily, there were a few people who could probe at close range. The group of friends were all clamoring. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Tell me. What does it feel like? Zhang Yingying's eyes were closed. Unfortunately, the camera wasn't pointed at her. It was just focused on the sand that was still in a boiling state, as well as the slender white fingers that were suspended above the boiling sand pit. Right now, the fingers were faintly trembling and moving. It was as if they were lightly stroking something. It seems alive. It's very coarse. It looks like it has fluff. What is this? Papercut began to doubt life. His scalp was splitting. Di Weiwu was incessantly annoying him to the side. Uncle Paper, what is Sister Yingying saying? Why don't you take out a paper man and let me give it a try? There were also some people suspected that Zhang Yingying was doing this on purpose. She was exaggerating, singing a two-man show with Luo Nan. However, the two people in the live broadcast didn't pay attention to these things. Luo Nan had a very amazed appearance. Your senses are quite exquisite. Your support is quite strong as well. The characteristics of this ability are very suitable for nurturing. Speaking of which, you should partner with Brother Papercut to make a petri dish or something. How did you derive the ability White Rainbow? Most of Zhang Yingying's mind was in the sand pit under her hand. It went in one ear and out the other. She only became more excited. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Tell me what to do next. Oh, let me adjust it a bit. I'll do my best to fit the characteristics of your ability. TSK, the effect will exceed expectations. The sand in the sand pit was already converging as Luo Nan spoke. It was no longer the cyclic and inflating bubbles. Instead, it formed an undulating mucous membrane. Truthfully speaking, the appearance of the sand pit was ugly. It lacked beauty. But Zhang Yingying's specific senses told her that there was another situation. The innumerable grains of sand still maintained their basic absorption and repulsion powers. But in a more complex reaction mode, some of them began to cluster and accumulate layer by layer, separating themselves from the other sand particles in the sandpit and forming a separate entity. Zhang Yingying's perceptual penetration was blocked by these clumped sand accumulations. Actually, it was not blocking, but the overall activity pattern of the aggregated sand had already derived extremely complicated details. It was so complicated that Zhang Yingying could not grasp it at all. She could only observe a general behavior pattern. How interesting! Zhang Yingying had already begun to discover a considerable amount of interest. It was as if she was playing some kind of nurturing or management game. In fact, there were indeed such works on the market. But when this model was brought into reality and touched with a more realistic and comprehensive perception, every moment seemed to have a breathtaking change in the details. The more sensitive one's perception was, the more inconceivable stimuli one could gather. Zhang Yingying devoted all her attention to it. No matter what, she wanted to know to what extent this pile of sand that had just taken shape would develop. Yes, let's give it a name. Let's call it a Sand Demon number 1. Oh, okay. Luo Nan simply responded. Next, Qi. A powerful disintegrative force descended from the sky, causing Sand Demon number 1 in the sandpit to disintegrate in an instant, returning it to its original state. The several centometers that descended with the disintegrative force also completed their mission. They flew up once more, revolving around the sandpit and humming. Sigma, O_O winky face. What are you doing? Zhang Yingying was really frightened. She was stupefied there for at least 3 seconds. She stared at Luo Nan with wide eyes when she understood what had happened. Her voice rose by a notch. Centometers and cheating. Ha! Zhang Yingying really could not imagine that Luo Nan could speak of this matter in such a righteous and confident manner. Luo Nan was indeed righteous and confident. He began to record the configuration state of Sand Demon number 1. He condensed it into a state of water vapor and let it float in the atmosphere. Then he wrote down the composition and structure of the centometers as they displayed their effects, including the direction and techniques of soul strength interference. Since Luo Nan lacked a concise symbol system, he could only make intuitive descriptions that were similar to geometry. Therefore, the writing on the blackboard took up a lot of space. Soon, it occupied a considerable area. The entire set was quite taxing on the eyes of the audience. But for ability users who lacked the concept of centometers, this was clearly a rather intuitive user manual. At the very least, it was like that. The human brain would always produce a few adorable illusions. Some people would think right now, I'm just missing a set of scintometers. Luo Nan did not explain too much about how to use the scintometers. Right now, his main direction of work was within the sandpit. Yes, at the same time, he needed to appease the human battery. I said before that we need to simulate the nature of the living layer. But if you think about it, you know that there's no way to make this sand evolve into a true living substance. For example, to create silicon-based life and the like. Therefore, it's just a simulation. In the beginning and end conditions, we'll artificially choose the corresponding characteristics and strengthen them. In this way, its foundation is still illusory. We can only do our best to make it a bit more stable at the higher levels. So what? Zhang Yingying was still brooding over the sudden death of Sand Demon number 1. You just need to continue simulating it. The problem is that we don't have time. Right now, it's just a demonstration. It's not a real experiment. We need to take care of the effects of the demonstration. Zhang Yingying clicked her tongue twice. Who are you mocking when you say these words? Luo Nan spread his hands. What I mean is this. Fast-forwarding, in other words, cheating, is inevitable. This is because I already know that there are some super configurations or system frameworks that are more effective than the one just now. It's just that our luck isn't good. We didn't encounter the probabilistic result during the natural combination process of the sand. We could only start over. Perhaps this is a bit more humane than watching them naturally collapse after accumulating layer upon layer. Or perhaps, do we need to demonstrate the natural collapse situation? Zhang Yingying was a bit startled, but she didn't say anything in the end. She just pursed her lips and became an emotionless human battery. Oh, Petri dish might sound a bit better. Regardless of whether or not Zhang Yingying got over it, Luo Nan really did pay attention. In the end, he demonstrated the natural collapse situation once. It was a relatively long and tedious process. The tens of thousands of sand particles within the sandpit were attracted or repelled by the squeezed mass of sand particles. They adjusted their body angles over and over again, gradually forming pieces of glued bodies. The glued bodies began to interact with each other, colliding, and even devouring each other. It was like a chaotic battle between many nations. They were no longer satisfied with the space limitations of the sandpit. They began to expand to the outer regions. The ordinary sand particles, which originally didn't possess the support of the configuration, were drawn into the chaotic battle between the nations to strengthen their respective strengths. However, maybe because the excessive amount of normal sand diluted the power of the configuration enhancement, or maybe because there was a bug in the internal system structure, when the pot of boiling sand was about to be unified and Sand Demon number 2 was about to appear, the devastating collapse came like a sudden plague. Zhang Yingying was stupefied as she watched the sand particles rapidly lose all vitality and completely collapse. She subconsciously raised her hands. I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything wrong. We can prove it to each other. The problem lies in the fact that the sand made too many wrong choices. Do you understand now? Zhang Yingying directly changed the topic. She gave him a sideways glance. Can you have a little bit of self-awareness? How many people can understand the lesson you're teaching? Oh, really? Let fate decide. Luo Nan laughed, his eyes squinting. Zhang Yingying was a bit startled, but she didn't say anything in the end. Luo Nan didn't talk much during the relatively long and tedious demonstration of natural collapse, but he wasn't idle. He was constantly observing the sandpit, the restless accumulation of sand particles. He was constantly recording and updating the meaningful system framework formed from tens of thousands of random combinations of simple configurations. The surrounding area where he stood was a beach where fog and seawater intersected. It was practically covered in diagrams formed from condensed water vapor. They were affected by the refraction of light. They were faint to the point of being non-existent. Sometimes they were extremely dazzling. Zhang Yingying didn't even dare to rashly move her position right now. Otherwise, she might destroy the writing on the blackboard next to her. Luo Nan wasn't just a recorder. He would give a simple explanation every time the recording was updated. He let the people watching the live broadcast know what kind of turning point the ecology of the sandpit was at. Sometimes he would even give a simple explanation of the corresponding structure. He would explain its advantages and disadvantages, as well as the possible direction of further transformation. This demonstration of natural collapse lasted for nearly an hour. It was longer than all of the previous live broadcasts combined. However, the reactions of the audience watching the live broadcast were quite good. Many people watched with keen interest. It was hard to imagine that ordinary sand could form such an interesting and coordinated performance after a simple reaction mode was set up. Most importantly, many people were able to see configuration content that was 10 times, 100 times richer than what they had accumulated in the first half of their lives. There was also the relevant knowledge of segmentation and combination. It must be known that ever since Professor Luo's public lecture half a year ago, configuration theory had become the most popular theories in the inner world along with the cage theory on the mental plane. Compared to the cage theory, configuration theory was only publicly known in 3 domains that could be researched on a large scale: the burner, the condensation ring, and the blood intent ring. The scope of research was quite narrow. There were also people who tried to extract configurations from their own cultivation experiences to conduct research, but most of them were unsuccessful. But today, Luo Nan was simply selling his configurations on a sale. Even if it was a framework structure that was destined to fail, and the vast majority of configurations had flaws of one sort or another, there would always be a bit of a marvelous and resplendent flash of light. As for which was the true flash of light, that was up to the individual to decide. Chapter 969. After comforting Zhang Yingying, after the experimental proof of natural collapse, the cheating demonstration experiment began again, and the progress of the experiment was suddenly accelerated. Correspondingly, the configurations displayed and the grander framework structures became more and more abundant, and they were replaced more and more frequently. A portion of people gnashed their teeth in anger when faced with such a large amount of information. A portion of people were infatuated and intoxicated. A portion of people were secretly delighted. But in the eyes of a few people, to be clear, in Zhang Yingying's eyes, Luo Nan looked a bit darkened. Luo Nan, who had entered an experimental state, was like a callous creator. He mobilized the countless possibilities of the fine sand community, nurturing it into a nearly living reaction. But then he extinguished it one by one like he was strangling an ant. He only kept a few possible branches and let them go again, causing the vitality in the sandpit to appear again. When it reached a certain level, he wiped it out again. He repeated the cycle again and again, strengthening and inheriting the configuration framework he needed. Well, Zhang Yingying knew that this was a very normal artificial selection of experimental pathways, and it was widely used in many scientific research fields. And Luo Nan's operation was extremely calm, precise, and on point from start to finish. There was absolutely no excessive behavior that violated scientific ethics. But she was a petri dish. All the products that simulated spirituality appeared in the sandpit. Even if they were temporary, shouldn't she put in effort and emotion? There were times when reason was not worth mentioning in front of emotions. Zhang Yingying endured round after round. In the end, she really could not hold it in any longer and began to quarrel with Luo Nan. It was one-sided. That's enough. I think this is good enough. Still not enough. You've already destroyed 30 rounds. Don't you have an answer? Can't we just copy him in the first round? Hey, are you listening to my opinion? This is too much. Utensils, I'm not playing with you anymore. Luo Nan jabbed down with an extremely callous finger just as his voice fell. Sand Goblin number 33 within the sandpit was just like its many predecessors. It suffered a calamity of total annihilation. It nearly swelled to the point of bursting out of the sandpit before collapsing and disintegrating. Zhang Yingying was so angry that she leaned back. She wished she could jump up and choke Luo Nan's neck. Maybe I can bear with it a little longer. At this moment, a buzzing sound lingered in his ears. The scintometers rose into the air again as usual and stared coldly at the life embers in the sand pit. Luo Nan was like this as well. But his line of sight drifted away half a second later. It seemed to be looking at the writing on the blackboard he had left behind earlier. It also seemed to be piercing through the moisture in the air to point towards the misty ocean. But soon, he turned his gaze back and smiled at Zhang Yingying. That's enough. Ah. Zhang Yingying was stunned. When she looked into the sandpit again, she saw that the sand that had just collapsed began to squirm strangely. Yes, squirming. It was impossible for a single grain of sand that had already disintegrated to display such a state. The reason for such a visual effect could only mean that there was an invisible network between the grains of sand that was connected in succession and conducted successively. Due to the existence of this invisible vein, Zhang Yingying very naturally ignored the common gaps between the sand grains, and regarded the existence in the sand pit as one. From the looks of things, it seemed that the sand had been broken up into 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces. The amplitude and frequency of the squirming of each piece was a bit different. Was it affected by the size of the split? But once these split pieces came together, the slight difference disappeared. In the time it took to take 3 to 5 breaths, there was only one frequency left in the sand pit. One pattern. It squirmed, twisted, and occasionally rolled. It slowly gathered together, drawing a boundary with the inactive sand at the edge of the sand pit. It looked like a somewhat lively fat snake. Well, it was also like seawater that flowed along a hidden channel on the beach. It wrapped around the grains of sand and followed a fine trench that was invisible to the naked eye. It gradually crossed the boundary of the sand pit and flowed in a meandering fashion on the even more expansive beach. Zhang Yingying's breathing became shallow. Her gaze followed the pile of sand on the beach for a long time. It seemed that even her breathing would become one with its squirming frequency. Sand Demon number 33. Luo Nan recorded the relevant configuration frame in the air as he answered, it can be considered a creation that conforms to the experimental goal. Basically. Conforms to the goal. What's the goal? Zhang Yingying had long since become muddle-headed from the large amount of information and the inexplicable emotions. Right now, she could only painstakingly recall and demonstrate the preset regulations before carrying out the experiment. Viscosity, plasticity, conductivity. As well as the mechanism of temporary decomposition and remodeling during high-risk times. Luo Nan casually reminded her. He wrote more and more on the blackboard at this time. Many of the special configuration features required large amounts of schematic conversion in order to be realized. And the condensed water vapor patterns floating around him were far too dense. In the end, he simply blew out a mouthful of air to clear the area around him. Only then was he able to continue. Holy crap. He really wiped. Don't. I haven't finished watching yet. Screenshot party laughs but doesn't speak. Rip-off party gently caresses the dog's head. Retard kneels. Great God, please link. The link is here. Double-click to like it, dear. Luo Nan's excessively casual actions created a chain of chaos in the many cyberspaces of the world. Well, the blackboard writing on the beach really was becoming more and more chaotic. Large amounts of diagrams were recorded. They floated in the air in the form of condensed water vapor. Their structures could be considered stable, but they were far too light. A gust of sea breeze could blow them away. So much so that a considerable portion had already left the camera. Some were even submerged in the pervasive mist of the seaside. This made those configuration researchers who truly wanted to learn beat their chests and stomp their feet. But before they had the time to howl in grief, Luo Nan's follow-up writings and explanations arrived. The seemingly concise yet extremely complex diagrams and the corresponding conversion and deduction process were like a soul-sucking monster. They firmly hooked their attention, finding it hard to loosen their focus even a bit. Luo Nan mainly explained Sand Demon No. 33's basic regulations. Based on the characteristics of the sand, he added secondary regulations to it through a configuration method. These were the things he warned Zhang Yingying about. All these regulations cannot be created out of thin air. They must be derived and extended according to the physical properties of the sand. The substrate is sand, and this is how it is. Changing the substrate requires a change in appearance. That is, the forces on the material plane are magnified in terms of the configuration concept. They accumulate layer by layer, ultimately establishing a passage from the material plane to the imaginary plane. Of course, this passage is hidden. A certain accumulation of conditions must be met before it can be opened. There must also be some margin for self-adjustment. This is a kind of regulation that imitates the laws of nature. It is also a display mode of mutual interference. It can be considered a key point related to the design. Luo Nan's explanation was quite on point under the layer upon layer of freshness. It caused a considerable portion of the live broadcast audience to be unable to extricate themselves. Even if they didn't understand, they could still feel that they had gained a great deal, right? But Zhang Yingying, who was close at hand, basically treated it as nothing. Most of her attention was focused on the body of Sand Demon No. 33. This creation, which she didn't know how to accurately define, crawled out of the sandpit and did a stretch of movement. It appeared to be a bit hesitant. Zhang Yingying was hesitating as well. Her camera lens swayed back and forth between Luo Nan and Sand Demon No. 33. This caused the minds of the live broadcast audience to be torn apart once more. A portion of the impatient people who preferred the material existence had already begun to curse. What the hell are you talking about? Give me a close-up view. Is that thing alive? I don't understand a thing at all. I just want to see a sand sculpture. Ah no, I want to see a sand demon. Of course, the longer one looked, the more one would discover. Sand Demon No. 33 lived up to expectations. The more focused the camera was, the more obvious the range of its movements became. It quickly passed its hesitation period at a location a bit far away from the edge of the sandpit. It began to crawl back, or was it flowing? It was really hard to use an existing framework to describe Sand Demon No. 33's mode of movement. However, this didn't affect its movement at all. At first, Zhang Yingying believed that this fellow would display a certain fondness towards its birthplace, the sandpit. But reality proved that this wasn't the case. At the edge of the sandpit, Sand Demon No. 33 would sometimes crawl and flow in a large range. A portion of its body would slide down the irregular edge of the sandpit. However, it would soon increase the frequency of its wriggling, driving its entire body to accelerate and escape. It seemed to be a bit repulsive. But it continued to move along the edge of the sandpit. It had nearly made a small circle in a few breaths of time. Yes, it was heading towards Zhang Yingying. Even as an energy provider, Zhang Yingying was constantly monitoring Sand Demon No. 33. But when this fellow passed by her, she still subconsciously extended her hand to touch it to get a more realistic tactile experience. She did touch it. Unexpectedly, it was a little cool and smoother than she imagined. The first feeling she got was not the coarse feeling of sand piled up. Most importantly, when she extended her finger over and made contact with Sand Demon No. 33, half a second later, the latter's flowing body clearly caved in and deformed to avoid her touch. Oh! Zhang Yingying let out a short gasp. Even she didn't quite understand the tactile sensation at that moment, and how it felt. Zhang Yingying didn't do anything else. Just like that, Sand Demon number 33 flowed under her finger and successfully circled around the sandpit. It headed towards the front of the beach where the waves were crashing against it. Zhang Yingying was stunned for a few seconds before she zoomed in on her finger. She could see that there were only a few grains of fine sand stuck to her finger. It looked like the new sand that Sand Demon number 33 had stuck to it as it crawled and flowed. It was because of Zhang Yingying's actions that more and more people came to a realization. They grasped a plausible line of logic. Zhang Yingying was Luo Nan's designated energy provider. She was the direct controller. The controller possessed the right to control. Sand Demon number 33 didn't seem to be obedient. The conclusion was, the strange existence on the beach seemed to be an uncontrollable automaton. This was terrifying. Of course, the holes in people's imaginations were even more terrifying. Oh my God. This thing has its own consciousness. It's alive. Is it really creating life? Chapter 970. Creating life. Clearly. That shouldn't be the case. Zhang Yingying knew very well that Sand Demon number 33, who was currently crawling on the beach, didn't have any power of its own. All of its energy source was provided by Zhang Yingying. However, after being electrified, this unique existence, not only did it appear to be autonomous on the outside, but its internal structure also clearly possessed a kind of cohesive gravitational force. One could even say that it was vitality. It was like the instinctive suction and desire of life, constantly seeking for more energy to support itself. Zhang Yingying unconsciously gave more energy. Hey! Restrain yourself. Ha! Zhang Yingying raised her head in a daze and saw Luo Nan frown. He extended his hand to point at her. Your consumption is a bit large. It doesn't have any restraining mechanism. Mind your own business. Though she said this, Zhang Yingying still controlled herself for a bit. A bit. Zhang Yingying had every reason to be excited. After the initial shock and chaotic period, she was now the one who single-handedly cultivated Sand Demon number 33. Petri dish. Her current sense of accomplishment was brimming. But on the other hand, it was just as Luo Nan said. Sand Demon number 33 didn't have any restraining mechanism. Zhang Yingying couldn't control anything other than the energy supply. It seemed to have its own goal. After bypassing the sandpit, it advanced all the way to the front of the beach. It crawled further and further, as if it wanted to crawl all the way into the sea. Zhang Yingying was a bit uncertain. She raised her head and asked Luo Nan, "What is it doing?" Luo Nan didn't answer. Even his lecture was interrupted. He just stared at the writing on the blackboard near him. It was as if he had entered a long examination. Perhaps he wanted to obtain an answer from it. Zhang Yingying was a bit flustered. She unconsciously raised her voice, "Even you don't know." Only then did Luo Nan come back to his senses. "What?" Zhang Yingying laughed in anger. She pointed at Sand Demon number 33, which was about to flow into the sea. "Did you create this to let it go into the sea?" "Oh, it's most likely incapable of doing so." Before Luo Nan's voice could fade away, a fine wave pushed along the front of the beach, smearing the coastal beach into a dark brown color. A portion of the wave just so happened to reach that position. It made brief contact with Sand Demon number 33. In the next second, Sand Demon number 33's body shrunk by a size. Zhang Yingying was so shocked that she stood up. As a human battery, she immediately sensed that Sand Demon 33's energy requirement had dropped, which meant that its overall active structure had weakened. It was shaved by the waves. Sand Demon number 33 showed its sluggish side. It stood there in a daze without any follow-up reactions. Zhang Yingying stomped her feet anxiously. She wanted to rush over, but Luo Nan took a step forward and reached out to grab her. Objective. Guessed my ass. Let me go. Even if you do you know how to get it back? Quack. Are you sure you won't cut it in half if you reach out? There's a pile of sand over there. _NH_NH, then what should we do? Luo Nan went, and replied cautiously, how about we first observe? Oh no. His chest had suffered a heavy blow from Zhang Yingying. He could feel the cold aura of the white rainbow in front of him. They were separated by 2 layers of skin. Luckily, Sand Demon number 33 finally reacted at this time. It began to crawl once more, and its direction was clear. It was heading in the opposite direction of the shoreline. The next wave chased after it, but it missed by a hair. Yeah. Zhang Yingying waved her arms and cheered, well done. Calm down. Calm down. Luo Nan felt that Zhang Yingying had sunken a bit. This wasn't good. But it was useless to say anything right now. He wasn't even the focal point. Zhang Yingying had forgotten herself. She completely treated Sand Demon number 33 as the main character of the live broadcast. The camera followed it from beginning to end, not deviating from it in the slightest. Sand Demon number 33 worked hard. It seemed that it had finally discovered the fatal threat of the sea. It began its journey of escape, moving farther and farther away from the sea. It didn't look back. However, it didn't turn back the way it came in a rush. Instead, it moved at an obtuse angle and vaguely headed in Luo Nan's direction. Frankly speaking, its speed wasn't slow. Zhang Yingying estimated that the length of this fellow's body was changing between 20 to 30 centimeters. And the distance it flowed, per second was a bit longer than its body length. And it seemed to be continuously increasing. This speed was approximately 100 meters per hour. It's already surpassed most ants. Not bad. Zhang Yingying also noticed that Sand Demon number 33 seemed to have naturally extended a new mechanism as it moved forward. Its moist body possessed a certain amount of tension. It seemed to be endlessly absorbing and gathering more fine sand in the area it passed through in order to expand its body size. It probably needed to replenish itself after being shaved by the sea. Zhang Yingying was already used to using a life perspective to think about it. But then again, Sand Demon number 33's behavior was a bit like its many predecessors that had died tragic deaths. It was rather worrying. But soon, Sand Demon number 33 proved that there was a certain reason why it was able to resist the cruel Luo clan screening and survive until now. When its body size expanded, it affected the rhythm and speed of its wriggling. In other words, when it reached a certain saturated state, its fat body would produce a slight repulsive force. The effect of unifying its body was like a layer of isolation membrane. It made it hard for the fine sand in the area it passed through to adhere to it no matter what. In the beginning, Sand Demon number 33 didn't seem to be aware of this. It continued to increase the frequency of its activity. Even the tumbling motion of this fat body increased by several times. It was clear that it hoped to continue increasing its body size. However, it rolled over and over again, rolled over and lost again. Zhang Yingying watched and watched. Then she burst into laughter. Her previous worries vanished like smoke in thin air. This bro was really stupid to the point of crying. Could it be that it was able to live until now because of its stupidity? Many people in the live broadcast audience had the same reaction as Zhang Yingying. But Luo Nan didn't laugh. He even nodded in the end. Its desired driving end has already taken shape and has begun to display its effects. But it receives the protection of the basic structure end. It's the same as eating and vomiting at the same time. It won't suffer from indigestion or excessive obesity. Currently, it has developed both ends, and it has realized two-way interference. It's a very healthy mode. Zhang Yingying smirked. If you say it's healthy, then it's healthy. But what about its IQ? Your request is a bit excessive. Luo Nan finally laughed. His gaze swept over a few more times. It's hard to say for its IQ. Its experience end seems to be accumulating and taking shape. Just as he spoke, Sand Demon number 33 seemed to have truly learned a few lessons from its many failures. The meaningless tumbling of its flowing fat body clearly lessened. Its forward speed slowed, and soon it came to a complete stop. There was still a distance of 2 to 3 meters between it and Luo Nan right now. It stayed in its original spot like this, but its body actually collapsed. It inexplicably began to flatten out, extending in all directions. The relatively stable core mass began to flatten out, nearly merging into one with the slightly undulating surface of the beach. Zhang Yingying was completely unable to understand. What's wrong? Is it so depressed that it's lying on the ground? Don't add drama to it. It's still an internal drama. Depression is an extremely advanced psychological mechanism. It doesn't have this material foundation yet. Luo Nan maintained a calm and bored state of research. He casually added a portion of content to the blackboard that was already unbearably crowded. It's sensing. It's receiving more information. You should be able to sense more energy consumption. Yep, it's an active sensing mode. It's similar to reaching out and touching. Of course, it's probing out grains of sand. This is already a type of ability. Its configuration transformation structure is like this. Luo Nan gave a few simple explanations, but Zhang Yingying wasn't interested in any of this. I just want to know. What will it do next? When the desired drive takes form, it will possess the ability to act autonomously. All of its actions will start from the perspective of survival and reproduction. Of course, we didn't add in the hereditary factor when we set up the rules. Therefore, its actions are easier to guess. Survival. Zhang Yingying seemed to understand something. Obtaining energy. It looks quite like it. So I suggest that you don't feed it too much. This is a very crucial period of growth. If it forms a habit of being lazy and gluttonous during this period, it won't be easy to change it. Zhang Yingying gave Luo Nan a hygiene ball for free. But then she gritted her teeth and controlled the amount of energy she poured into Sand Demon number 33 to the initial standard. Sand Demon number 33 collapsed more and more. It simply looked as if all the water in its body would seep into the sand. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Zhang Yingying couldn't help but worry. Is there really no problem? Its configuration transformation is orderly, and this is also a kind of energy-saving state. At the same time, it's increasing its contact with the external environment. What do you mean? It obtains information and makes a response. Then it sees which response has the most substantial effect. It can obtain more positive feedback. In other words, it can be simply said that it's making a judgment. Zhang Yingying was shocked. Does this stupid bro really have a brain? Your way of speaking is far too loose. It absolutely can't reach the level of a highly intelligent life form. However, your perspective of observation is also problematic. You can't directly regard this pile of sand as an individual just because it has a unified behavior pattern. In the end, it is still a kind of accumulation of tens of millions of special sand particles acting on each other. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to view it as a hive of bees, a nest of ants, a flock of birds, or a school of fish. Or perhaps it's between a colony and an individual. Luo Nan blinked. This is the special quality of a super configuration. Please. Don't lecture me. Zhang Yingying raised her hand to beg for forgiveness. What I mean is that it's pitifully simple as a whole response pattern. It can only do what you saw at the beginning. If you view this as one, then one is one. There are no other possibilities. Luo Nan pointed at the symptom floating in midair as he spoke to this point, but if you take this one and split it into even finer and simpler patterns. As long as the simple patterns that are split out still possess the meaning of configuration, then one is 1,000, and one is 10,000. And if they are able to possess an efficient and common method of communication between them, then the combined configuration patterns between them will be innumerable. The innumerable combined configuration patterns will bring about endless possibilities. The possibilities rapidly expand and accumulate. Inconceivable characteristics will emerge from within them when the magical probabilities display their effects. Yes. This is precisely the importance of symptom. Chapter 971. Zhang Yingying felt that she had missed too much during her philosophy class, her theology class, or when Luo Nan was giving his all in teaching. She suppressed her doubts towards her own intelligence and tried to integrate Luo Nan's explanation. She once again seriously and carefully observed the single and infinite mode of sand demon number 33. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but when she focused her gaze on the pile of sand that was dehydrated and almost couldn't be seen clearly, the top layer of sand, which had the outline of sand demon number 33 on it, seemed to have moved. It was like a camouflage cloth. It trembled and shifted in the direction of the sea breeze. Its speed was at least 3 times slower than its normal state, but it possessed a subtle sense of rhythm. Luo Nan nodded his evaluation. It seems that it understands its current situation quite well. Are you saying that it's very smart? I can only say that it's very sensitive. Luo Nan indicated for Zhang Yingying's camera to follow. He gave Sand Demon number 33 a close-up view of the area it had stayed in before. Look here. The sand particles on the surface have actually been blessed. But right now, their basic configurations have collapsed. They can be considered dead. Zhang Yingying moved her feet to follow behind Sand Demon number 33. She faced the camera, wishing that she could stick her own eyes in. But she really couldn't distinguish the difference between these fine white sand particles. The death of these sand particles is not meaningless. Through death, they send a certain kind of information to their surviving companions. What? Zhang Yingying's eyes widened innocently. She lost the courage to even inquire further. Forget it. Whatever you say, Professor Luo. Fortunately, Luo Nan began to condense water vapor at this time. He used the configuration method to express his explanation. This way. I have even more reason to not understand. Alright, Zhang Yingying actually understood a bit. Luo Nan's main idea was that Sand Demon number 33 was an accumulation of sand particles. The individuals within its community were currently attempting to survive in a state of low energy supply. Since they were born from energy configurations, the first choice they made to survive in a state of low energy supply was to reduce the consumption of energy from their bodies. They needed to do subtraction for themselves, to get rid of unnecessary consumption structures. They sought a balance between the double red lines of survival and conservation. In other words, they were cutting themselves. After a few cuts, those that could still preserve their basic structure and functionality would be left behind. The rest would naturally be finished. The thousands of individuals of Sand Demon number 33 were eliminated internally in such a simple yet tragic way. There was no need to talk about the ones who were eliminated. The ones who succeeded had to pass on the experience of their success to the entire tribe through a highly efficient mechanism. That's so complicated, it's like a configuration designer, and you're saying that they don't have brains. You were the first to question them. Luo Nan played it down and changed the topic in an instant. But I still want to say this. This has nothing to do with the brain. It's just a sort of superposition of sensing. Yes. At most, it's the efficiency of sensing. And these are not things that it learned in a short period of time after coming out of the pit. I have already talked about this. Of course not. Zhang Yingying questioned instinctively. I really did. It's just that before Sand Demon number 33 was formed in the sandpit, the dozen or so aggregates in the internal competition stage had gone through at least 40 to 50 rounds of similar screening. All the sensing efficiencies that couldn't keep up were eliminated completely. Actually, after Sand Demon number 20, this sort of mechanism has already been embedded into the basic configuration. It can be considered an artificial selection inheritance. Afterwards, it's just endlessly strengthened. Look, the relevant configuration records are still floating over there. Luo Nan extended his hand to point at a certain area behind the sandpit. The series of diagrams there had already piled up into a large maze. Just a glance was enough to make Zhang Yingying dizzy. Zhang Yingying was a bit stupid. She turned the camera for the first time, letting herself face the global audience. Is there really such a thing? People knew very well that Zhang Yingying couldn't see it, but there were quite a few people who fiercely nodded from all over the world. In the end, Zhang Yingying received some feedback from her circle of friends. But they were all extremely negative things like, I'm crying from being stupid, I've lost face to the entire world, and there was even, pregnancy makes you stupid for 3 years. Bah! I've been working hard to raise them. You did quite a bit of work when I was raising them. Luo Nan squinted his eyes and laughed, sowing good karma, reaping good results. Enough. You're already being weird. Now you're putting on the posture of a charlatan. Are you preparing to establish a religion? Zhang Yingying's mentality was about to collapse. She wasn't prepared to get to the bottom of things. She just wanted to speak frankly. Just tell me clearly what Stupid Sand is going to do next. Stupid Sand. Aha! My son is Stupid Sand. Zhang Yingying simply smashed the broken jar. She answered boldly and confidently, I'm going to raise it. Of course, I have to give it a name. It's quite fitting, right? I think that you get to the point. Luo Nan put his hands on his hips. He moved his head to 2 different positions, but he felt that it was not the right place. In the end, he could only smile helplessly and bitterly, okay. I'm guessing that Sand Demon number 33, Stupid Sand's correct behavior has changed direction. It should be because it knows that simply seeking size is meaningless to it. It needs to pursue something more practical. Zhang Yingying raised her eyebrows. She confirmed the conclusion she had already reached before, energy. It's energy. The current Sand Demon. Fine, Stupid Sand's behavior target and the corresponding sensing configuration change were already extremely clear. Luo Nan added a few simple strokes on the blackboard and explained. You are currently its only energy provider, and you are relatively stable most of the time. You can be considered a fixed quantity. However, its sensing mode is becoming more and more complex. It clearly needs more and more energy to be ingested. This forms an energy gap, and this leads to its desire. Who is it leading to? Me. In a certain sense, you, or perhaps your energy provider, is already a part of Stupid Sand's system. Moreover, you are the part with the lowest efficiency in sensing and mutation. According to its behavior pattern, it won't waste its effort on this. Zhang Yingying's camera continued to track Stupid Sand's movement trajectory. She made a random guess, then it's you. It went around. Stupid Sand had practically spread out into a thin layer in the camera. It seemed to be riding a relatively strong sea breeze. Its entire body spun in a whirl as it went around Luo Nan's heel. It practically didn't make contact at all. Yeah. Maybe it's afraid. After all, I've always existed as a strong interference force. You're adding drama to it. Inner drama. Zhang Yingying immediately caught onto Luo Nan's words. She gave him a taste of his own medicine. Luo Nan's reasoning was ample. Fear is a very basic reaction. It is possible to develop a similar avoidance mechanism after the desire side and the experience side are in embryonic form. Especially now. Stupid Sand's internal mechanism is already very complex. We can only decipher a portion of the clear veins. Most of it is hidden within the chaos. Perhaps it's just a flash of inspiration. We can find a relatively stable structural carrier and store it for a long period of time. Who knows? This requires a more detailed reduction and segmentation. Zhang Yingying's eyebrows shot up. Segmentation. You're going to cut it off later. This is follow-up research. It's so stupid, yet you still want to cut it off. Where's the logic? Don't even think about it. I said that this is my son. I'm going to raise it. Zhang Yingying's attitude was resolute and decisive. There was no room for discussion. Luo Nan was tongue-tied. Just as this little dispute was taking place, the extremely lowly dumb Sand could not understand the debate that was happening above its head, which involved its or their life and death. It only followed its established behavior pattern and slowly moved forward in an energy-saving state, even borrowing the push of the sea breeze. Where in the world does it want to go? Herman suddenly raised this question within the video conference. It's not just now. It tried to head into the sea before. It only turned back after suffering injuries. If what Luo Nan said is true, what method does it use? Or what method does it hope to use to obtain energy? Raising this question proved that Herman was listening very seriously. He had his own thoughts. However, not everyone was interested in this sort of technical question that involved supernatural powers. More people were concerned about the more direct question of investment returns. A certain representative immediately shot back in anger. Come on, Mr. Herman. Are we having a meeting today just to let people mock our ignorance in the field of scientific research? Yeah. Even though I'm a professional researcher, I don't have any intention of mocking you. Bald Jeff straightforwardly and fearlessly inserted himself into the dispute. He ignored the peculiar gazes cast at him from all sides and directly proceeded with the next round of operations. Only half a second passed before the scene of the solemn video conference suddenly changed. The sea breeze, the beach, the thin mist, and the fine waves were like a classical oil painting. The light and shadow pattern that was infinitely close to reality was projected before everyone's eyes. And soon, the participants discovered that all the scenery before their eyes moved according to their own natural rhythms. Not to mention the 20 or 30 familiar faces on the beach. They stood and walked, displaying a familiar scene. Herman temporarily forgot to quarrel with others. He was a bit pleasantly surprised. Zeolite Beach's virtual reality. Zhang Yingying probably can't support the materials needed for this kind of reality with just a single shot. That's right. All the participants had entered the virtual reality created from the live broadcast. It was as if they had traversed thousands or even tens of thousands of kilometers to arrive at the focal point of Zeolite Beach. They themselves transformed into incorporeal souls and seeped into it. Aside from being unable to get too close and directly touch it, everything seemed to be real. Of course, the materials for one seat aren't enough. However, Luo Nan's required experimental equipment has already passed by more than one wave. The people on the periphery are all bored to death. Also, drones have already piled up in the air above Zeolite Beach. Thank God the Blood Flame Order didn't shoot them down. However, a mid-air collision could happen at any time. Bald Jeff displayed a control ability that far exceeded his predecessors by 100 times. He was able to play different tricks with the same technical explanation service. He didn't create this virtual reality just to enhance the perception of the participants. He wanted to improve it by another level. In the next second, a halo similar to an AR effect was cast onto the body of Sand Demon number 33, which seemed to be wrapped in the sea breeze as it moved forward. Oh, now it was called Stupid Sand. At the same time, there was a dotted line that extended forward from the halo. It crossed a distance of around 10 meters and arrived at the nearly forgotten former focal point area. I can answer your question right now, Mr. Herman. This monster's destination is right there. It's a place that we've already lost control of. Chapter 972. Why over there? On the beach, even Zhang Yingying, who was completely focused on her son, could feel the rising clamor on the beach. She furrowed her brows and swept her gaze towards the sky, but in the end, she still landed on the core issue. Previously, Luo Nan had just marked out the most likely route for the Stupid Sand. It pointed straight at the largest gathering area on the beach, the scene where Shi Xinhe and the other burners were struggling to adapt. Luo Nan explained, the initial design of the Sand Demon's basic configuration was done in reference to the standard. Between open systems, similar structures will form a certain echo. And right now in this area, the energy with the most radioactivity is over there. The feeling is quite intimate. Is that so? Zhang Yingying felt that Luo Nan's explanation was a bit crude compared to before, but she soon found a point that required more attention. Intimate? Is it as intimate as me, its mother? Of course not. But it can't always suck milk. Hey! Luo Nan's chatting skills needed to improve, but his judgment was always trustworthy. Reality was just as Luo Nan said. The Stupid Sand was riding the sea breeze, sticking close to the ground as it headed towards that location. It even began to change its form midway. It changed from its energy-saving state to its normal state. It once again transformed into a flowing fat snake. Its speed increased explosively by 3 times. Luo Nan gave a simple evaluation of this: it's hungry. As the distance between the two sides gradually closed, Zhang Yingying's lens began to widen, encompassing an even more comprehensive scene. Many of the live broadcast viewers suddenly remembered, so there was a group of people on Zeolite Beach. That's right. Wasn't this the reason why they fell into the pit earlier? Yep, that side doesn't seem to be in a sorry state anymore. Speaking of which, Zhang Yingying was to blame. This amateur broadcast host wasn't very competent. All of her scenes were focused on Luo Nan in the middle and later stages of the broadcast. She was either focused on Luo Nan or her own biological son. She completely cast Shi Xinhe and the others to one side. Luo Nan's natural collapse experiment alone took up over an hour during this period of blank time. The vast majority of the audience followed Luo Nan's train of thought, climbing up and down in the configuration world. Shi Xinhe, Hu De, and the others were in a corner that everyone had forgotten. They were carrying out arduous, high-intensity adaptability team-building activities. A scholar is better off 3 times. In any case, Luo Nan had to look at them with new eyes. You've improved a lot. Zhang Yingying, who was distracted, could see the changes over there. Of course, she was judging from the orderly state of the sand ball floating in the middle of the circle. Yes, what a waste. There's really no cure for your brain. Zhang Yingying was still brooding over Luo Nan's thoughts of wanting to cut up her biological son at the drop of a hat. She seized the opportunity to retort. Luo Nan just laughed. He didn't speak. He had his reasons for saying that. The sand ball that Luo Nan had gifted to Shi Xinhe and the others was absolutely not just a demonstration product. It was actually a normative model of the 4-layer structure in the superconfiguration theory. Every detail inside and outside the flowing sphere was actually a product of high generalization. Luo Nan didn't have high expectations for the precision of Shi Xinhe and the others' control when he gave it to them. He didn't have any requests. But looking at the situation, these burners were accustomed to the rigorous and prescriptive constraints of the dynamo core. Even if their life energy temporarily broke away from the constraints of the dynamo core, they were highly sensitive to the corresponding operating rules that originated from the same source when they used them in a broader domain. They didn't need anyone to supervise them. The constraints and operation of the sandball model naturally became the iron law that anchored their minds. Slight deviations and misalignments could be temporarily hidden from the senses of one person, but they were bound to be corrected by the collective senses of the 7 people. And so, this team-building activity unknowingly became a positive feedback loop. It became a positive feedback loop where individuals constantly made mistakes, and the group constantly corrected them. The individual level increased, and the precision of correction increased accordingly. Aside from using the sand ball as a reference, the dazzling light trajectories outside their bodies had returned to their natural state. If one didn't look carefully now, they wouldn't be able to see them. This proved that their control abilities had been effectively improved. Luo Nan's evaluation of this as a waste didn't mean that he regretted giving away the model. Instead, it was that this group of people had gotten a bit too carried away in the end. The positive feedback loop formed was so tight that the second wave, third wave, and even later wave of experimental equipment that had arrived in succession following orders from various parties were unable to find any leeway to intervene. More and more people gathered on the beach, but they could only be reduced to spectators, or scouts. This sort of rhythm couldn't be considered efficient. Luo Nan noticed this situation and began to consider how to get the later equipment to join in as soon as possible. Yes, Stupid Sand's actions were actually quite a good opportunity. Right now, Stupid Sand, that fat snake, had already wriggled to the periphery of the team-building activities circle under the continuous effects of its hunger. It clearly lacked understanding of the more complex characteristics of energy activities. It didn't feel any difference between the inside and outside of the circle at all. It smoothly flowed inside. Screech. The glowing phenomenon, which had already disappeared, suddenly appeared like electric arcs that suddenly flashed between electric lines. One end came from a floating segmenter on the periphery of the circle. The other end came from a curved curve and ended at Stupid Sand's body. Sand and dust flew everywhere. There seemed to be several levels of weak electric fire flickering in the middle. It crackled loudly. Zhang Yingying's cry of surprise was suppressed by an intense gasp. She subconsciously grabbed Luo Nan's arm. Fortunately, Luo Nan's reaction was quick. He temporarily increased the intensity of the local area. Otherwise, she might have been crushed. It's fine. It's fine. How can it be fine? I saw it explode. Are you sure it wasn't me? Speaking of which, you're still supplying energy. Is that so? Do you remember? I said not to consider it as a simple one. It's a 1 or a 10,000. It's a group superconfiguration system. In fact, its system attribute is more dominant than the physical attribute. You have the time to lecture me. My son got struck again. Luo Nan didn't say anything. He simply grabbed Zhang Yingying's hand to prevent her from being hot-headed and directly charging forward. This little girl was normally quite clever. Could it be that being in a petri dish for a long time had the effect of stimulating oxytocin? Right now, Shi Xinhe, Hu De, and the others all discovered that a foreign object had invaded their increasingly clear and stable domain. And it was a never-before-seen monster. The 7 people had different levels of ability, but they were all military elites. It was impossible for them to be easily affected by this little thing that posed almost zero threat. Even though it was very inexplicable and very strange, why didn't it explode? Similar thoughts flowed through the hearts of the 7 people, both overtly and covertly. Right now, they didn't have the slightest doubt that this invisible domain, which had bypassed the control of the dynamo core, was the formatted space. The 7 people worked together to set it up. As their mutual tacit understanding increased, the domain gradually stabilized. The psychic pressure within the domain continued to rise. Even though they weren't wearing armor and weren't connected to the Deep Blue Walker's energy boxes, the burners were able to flatten the sandy beach by relying on their own life energy. It was so flat that it seemed to have undergone hardening. And when stupid sand rashly intruded, the pressure within the domain was unbalanced, causing the psychic pressure to explode in an instant. The highly concentrated format of fire had already formed an effect similar to that of a plasma bullet. In the end, the format of fire hacked at stupid sand's body, but its body only shrank a little bit and raised a bit of sand and dust. Stupid sand's head was dizzy, but it didn't reduce the speed of its advance by much. Even Shinha and Huda, who were meticulous in their thinking, were at a loss. Huda cast a few glances at stupid sand. He didn't know whether or not it was his misconception, but when the format of fire struck the monster's body, there seemed to be a repulsive force. There seemed to be some sort of melting effect. It was like using all of one's strength to smash a stick into sticky mud. It seriously lacked the feeling of striking. Switch positions. Shinha, who acted as the temporary main force, took the initiative to issue orders. His sensitivity towards the details of the format of fire couldn't compare to Huda's, but he was very clear that this little monster was related to Luo Nan's follow-up experiment. He absolutely didn't dare to mess with it. He couldn't afford to provoke it, but he could always hide. Huda glanced at stupid sand again, but he didn't raise any objections. The 7 people relied on their explosively increased tacit understanding. They didn't need to make any careful arrangements. Their feet shifted together, and they pulled apart the distance between them and stupid sand with a few steps. During this time, Huda added another suggestion: how about we go to the workstation? The so-called workstation referred to the Deep Blue Walker exoskeleton armor that stood towering on the seaside. Luo Nan had already made arrangements before. Their final goal was to combine forces to drive this thing and achieve the required standards for the experiment. If it was an hour ago, when they could only heat each other and act as tungsten wires, they really wouldn't have the courage to do this. But now, their confidence had increased substantially along with their tacit understanding and control. When Huda mentioned it, practically everyone was itching to give it a try. Shinha was relatively calm. This was because according to common sense, he should be the one to enter the cockpit in the end. He should be the one to verify whether or not the experiment was successful. There's still a difference in the number of people we have. The chief said that the more the better. It's here again. Forget it. Just pretend I didn't say anything. From the perspective of a normal person, the current stupid sand in the form of a fat snake really looked like an iron simpleton. After entering the formatted domain of the group of 7, it had clearly been rejected. It short-circuited wherever it went. It was hacked at least 3 or 4 times, but it actually persevered and didn't give up. It wholeheartedly charged forward. Shinha and the others shifted positions, pulling apart the distance between them. This fellow stayed dizzy in place for a few seconds. It was unknown what channel it used to capture information, but it continued to press forward once more. It was just that its judgment wasn't that accurate. It flowed and crawled for almost half a minute, charging a distance of 2 meters. In the end, its direction was completely wrong. It began to flip up and down, going around in place. This caused quite a few of the live broadcast viewers to be shocked. Chapter 973. Dumb Sand finally came to a realization amidst the explosive laughter that resounded throughout the world. It began to painstakingly correct its position, but it was useless most of the time. This continued until it used its trump card, alternating between the fat snake and the thin membrane state a few times. Only then did its accuracy increase. Even though it was crooked, it was still able to find a general direction. But if Sher Shinhe and the others were to shift their positions a few more times, this iron fool would most likely not be able to find his way north. Sher Shinhe and the others were indeed prepared to do this. But at this time, nearly 2 hours later, Luo Nan's order descended upon their heads once more. You guys. 2 more people. The order was just a reminder to Sher Shinhe's group of 7. Their true target was the new batch of equipment that came later. The 20 to 30 burners had been idle behind the beach for a long time. They came from a variety of sources, including the military, corporations, laboratories, and so on. But the 2 hours of sentry duty was enough for them to cultivate a certain level of tacit understanding. The group of people had a simple discussion, and 2 people walked out from the front. They slowly walked over to the incorporeal domain on the beach. Most of these people had their own channels to help them interpret and analyze the situation during the 2 hours they had been watching from the sidelines. Not too long ago, Dumb Sand had even personally explained the situation to them. It was better than nothing. So when they strode forward, they were prepared both physically and mentally. The problem was that the mass of these 2 burners was much larger than Dumb Sand. Correspondingly, when they stepped into the circle, the recoil force of Sher Shinhe and the others' positive feedback loop was much stronger. Arcs of light snaked through the air of Zeolite Beach once more. They were blazing and malevolent, and they headed straight for the heads of the 2 people who had just entered the circle. Even though the first batch of the group of 7 already had experience and had done some control beforehand, the 2 people still entered a rigid state in an instant. They didn't seem to be much more brilliant than the iron fool that was flowing in a crooked manner. In every sense of the word. It was as if the 2 of them had been electrified, and they perfectly replicated the tungsten filament state that Sher Shinhe and the others had 2 hours ago. At the same time, the balance was broken, and Sher Shinhe and the others also had an abnormal discharge. To make matters worse, the sand ball model that had almost been perfected was twisted again. On the other side, the intense energy radiating might have given Dumb Sand a clearer direction, causing this little thing to become excited again. Its speed increased explosively, and it completely corrected its direction, heading towards the shining land, and even towards the sand ball model floating in the center, heading straight for it. Luo Nan saw everything with his eyes. Then he issued another order: every 5 minutes, 2 more will enter, and so on. In an instant, under the dazzling light on the beach, almost everyone's forehead was covered in sweat. What happened on Zeolite Beach after that was more like a comical comedy for most of the viewers who were watching the live broadcast. Stupid Sand, the tyrant body that was always clumsy, and iron-headed, but occasionally brilliant and had an immortal body. It was a bunch of experimental equipment that kept increasing, to the point that they swayed and returned to being clumsy. And the chase between the 2 could be said to be absurd. To put it simply, the group of people was upside down, and the monster was crooked and twisted. There were all sorts of electric arcs and light effects interspersed in the middle, and dust was scattered. It was clamorous and chaotic to the extreme. Many people in various regions of the world were already going crazy with laughter. But there were still many people who were unable to laugh. For example, the group of ghosts that were using high technology and high consumption methods to gather on Zeolite Beach. Right now, the conditions for these capitalists and their trusted representatives to watch the live broadcast were becoming more and more in place. Aside from personally watching the scene in the form of ghosts, the visual effects of the data they received on the scene had already reached the pinnacle. Within the formatting domain of the current focus, the originally incorporeal domain now displayed a relatively complete coverage before their eyes, as well as a portion of the key structure of the system. It was direct and clear. They could select any participant to understand the basic information and the power they belonged to. And the level of role these people played in the current domain, the ups and downs of their state, and the quality of their performance were all displayed in a dynamic manner. They could see it with a single glance. Even the iron fool that crawled all over the place in the domain had quite detailed observation data attached to it. This included the calculation of its body length, volume, and weight, the amount of lightning it had to bear each time it was struck by lightning, the subsequent losses, the state of repair, and so on. Of course, this also included the predicted path of the two's pursuit. It was quite accurate. When faced with this sort of scene where the real and the false were combined, people would naturally have the confidence to control everything. However, these elites who were used to rolling about in the sea of business understood one thing very well: behind gorgeous diagrams and data, there were often holes that couldn't be filled with normal expressions. Then again, Baldy Jeff didn't have any intention of hiding it. At most, he carried a bit of a lack of sincerity. It clearly isn't a very good forager. It has already been blinded by greed. Was this a denial? Not a single person could hear anything like this. This was because Baldy Jeff was simply using the standard of evaluating life to apply to this strange creation that had no head or tail, was muddled and faceless, and only possessed a limited number of reaction modes. No one present was an idiot. They could all see that Luo Nan was currently weary of dealing with Mother Zhang, who was secreting an excess of oxytocin. The two were tangled together, and there was no explanation for dumb sand at all. There was no control to speak of. But it was in this sort of uncontrolled state that dumb sand displayed its truest and most reliable performance in movement, including perception, reaction, and related goals. This series of actions could be called slow and stupid. But the problem was that people could more or less discover, feel, and even understand the internal logic within. The immediate and intuitive data attached to it was the most obvious evidence. Of course, there were always contrarians everywhere. It's just artificial intelligence. And I can see that it's a path of deep learning. It's just that it's been packaged with extraordinary power and catalyzed a bit. Catalyzed, a bit? You know that it's deep learning. Then you should be very clear on how much data is needed for a useful AI to be immersed in. How much training time is needed? Please. Transfer learning is the foundation, okay? Even Luo Nan admits that he cheated. Is it that hard to transfer a neural network in advance? What about a carrier? Or do you think that this pile of sand is actually a chip? Oh, right. The silicon content is quite high. You also know that a carrier is needed. Then explain to me. What level of material support is needed to turn a pile of sand into an artificial intelligence? An astronomical amount of computing power. Of course, an astronomical amount of energy consumption. Where does all of this come from? Did it fall from the sky? That's why this is a groundbreaking result. If he really did place a supercomputer next to him, and if he buried a nuclear reactor in the sea, what are we fighting for? Groundbreaking cannot subvert the laws of physics. Extraordinaries aren't gods. Hey, you have quite the bearing of a researcher. Then why don't you explain the era of distortion? Explain the extraordinary power. Explain the extraordinaries who aren't gods. Or maybe you can discuss it with them face to face. The specters found it hard to interfere with reality for the time being. Under the catalysis of a series of inducements, a few people began to make a racket. Moreover, they were affected by the current deep problem. All of them copied half-baked theoretical concepts. You chattered and I pecked. Chicken feathers flew everywhere. At the same time, there were people who tried to sort out the threads of thought and find a more realistic solution. As the youngest person in the conference, Herman's ability to receive and digest information was quite outstanding. He worked hard to sort out his thoughts and asked their technical guide, Jeff. What do you think is the greatest threat to us from what Luo Nan has demonstrated so far? To be more precise, what do you think is the greatest threat to our investments? Investment isn't my area of expertise, Mr. Herman. Bald Jeff pointed at his shiny skull. I can only bring up problems that I find hard to explain and deal with as a reference. Is that okay? Of course. Bald Jeff extended 2 fingers. There are 2 problems. The first is an old problem. How did Luo Nan connect different authorizations and different versions of the dynamo core's regulations together? We can guess that those damned syncopators played a crucial role. We can even dig out a few so-called superconfiguration structures. We can try to repeat the experiment. But there's one thing: what's the threshold for using the syncopators? After all, the current intelligence shows that the cost of this toy is very low. Herman laughed bitterly. Jeff, I feel that your attainments in investment are quite okay. There was no doubt that Bald Jeff's words had hit the sore spot in the hearts of everyone present. For a product, the most fatal thing was never the intergenerational competition of technology within the existing framework. Instead, it was the substitution of new things that transcended the existing framework. Think about it. A group of syncopators could be easily controlled by humans. They could fly up and down, soar freely. They could send the implanted dynamo core, which required powerful technical support, into the trash in a matter of minutes. Quite a few people felt their blood pressure soar when they thought about this scene in their minds. Some people sought to comfort themselves, people like Luo Nan, who can easily control objects with their thoughts. Even among the psychic ability users, there are very few of them, right? Indeed, there are very few of them. However, I just received some information from the Bitter Reef Laboratory in T-City. Bald Jeff snapped his fingers. In the virtual reality, a certain syncopator floating on the beach suddenly disassembled into many different components, forming a set of very intuitive 3D component drawings. After disassembling this little toy, we can draw a basic conclusion. In its initial design, a portion of space was reserved for a control chip to be loaded in. If you make do with it, a miniature maglev motor is also possible. Even if it doesn't work, the distribution of special materials in a special force field isn't a problem that's hard to solve. Jeff didn't directly say the answer, but everyone present understood what he was implying. Simple threshold control really wasn't much. Someone pressed his forehead. The ghost group that gathered here fell into a stagnant silence. However, Bald Jeff still had another question. Second, why didn't that sand demon die? Chapter 974. What? Many people didn't understand the meaning behind Jeff's words. Facing most of the specters, who were at a loss, Jeff turned his hand back and added an emphasis effect to the stupid sand on the beach. I mean, this seemingly stupid thing is clearly just a pile of sand. Its structure is loose, and it doesn't have any strength or toughness to speak of. But why is it able to carry the continuous output of the format of fire and still move freely after entering the format space? Gentlemen, do you have an answer? No one responded immediately. Some people were still pondering over the deeper meaning behind Jeff's words, but there were also people with stronger comprehension, such as the youngest Mr. Herman. He thought hard, and with a flash of inspiration, he went around the bend and blurted out, "It's a threat." Jeff raised his eyebrows and added another word, "an extremely great threat." At this moment, the stupid sand that Jeff had highlighted was still crawling back and forth in a frightening manner, jumping back and forth between the normal beach and the format domain supported by a group of burners. But there was no doubt that most of the time, it played the role of a disruptor, adding to the chaos of the constantly adding new people, seriously imbalanced, and extremely busy, experimental equipment. At the same time, it also endured the rejection and bombardment of the format domain. For the vast majority of the audience, due to the joyous atmosphere on the zeolite beach, it was very difficult for them to associate the flashing electric arcs in the air with lethality. But in the visual image in front of these high-level participants, every blow suffered by the stupid sand was estimated, labeled, and compared. Bald Jeff made a simple conversion of these values and expressed it in a way that was easier to understand. In the past 20 minutes, this sand demon suffered 46 format fire attacks, the smallest of which was less than 100 joules. Let's filter this out and find a higher standard, more than 4,000 joules, about the standard of 1 gram. How about that? The participants basically had the relevant knowledge, and they knew that this had already exceeded the kinetic energy of most bullets fired from large-caliber rifles, and the power was already quite impressive. But after a simple filtering, there were still 39 records left on the table. Moreover, there were many that exceeded 1 to 2 orders of magnitude, and there was even a record that broke through 1,000,000 joules. Are you joking? What's the difference between this and a cannonball? It's just a high-explosive grenade, and it did make a hole back then, a shallow hole. I can't see it at all. Wait, that seems to be the problem. Among the participants, most of them were smart and conscientious people. It was just that they were affected by various disturbances and were momentarily confused. When someone reminded him, he immediately came to his senses. At this moment, almost all the participants were horrified. Yes, that's the problem. Be it the format of space or the format of fire, they clearly did not show the destructive power they should have. Where did the energy go? Someone tried to find a counterexample, those burners that joined later on. It's pretty much the same situation. That's right, those new members are also suffering from a similar impact, and there are no obvious signs either. But please note that the model of their suffering from the impact is completely clear. Bald Jeff snapped his fingers again and displayed the relevant data and a simple model. From this, it can be seen that the unmanifested part of the energy gap has re-entered the internal circulation of the domain and is almost not lost. Therefore, it is not harmful to the new members. It was an obvious injury. But here in the Sand Demons, the situation is completely different. We can calculate the explosive power of the domain, and we can estimate the bearing capacity of the surrounding environment as well as the visible losses of the Sand Demons. However, when we subtract the two, there is still a part of the gap that we are unable to detect. If we remove the head and the tail, the missing gap is undoubtedly the Sand Demon's ability to bear and absorb energy. Alright, Luonan said it in a joking manner, but we can't treat it as a joke. The Sand Demon easily took it. The gap it created is not easy at all for the format of space, which is to say, for the theoretical and technological system of the domain of space. Herman couldn't help but scratch his scalp. Is it very troublesome? The gap created by the Sand Demon's digestion is something that our current theoretical framework and calculation model are unable to deduce. Bald Jeff's answer was extremely simple, but it made people's hearts ache. Moreover, this wasn't the end. We also need to know that destructive power is merely the most superficial layer of this system. It is a complex system that involves a high degree of interference and influence between the mental and the material. The problem that has been revealed so far is still unknown to the entire system. Of course, the situation might not be as bad as I've described it to be. There will be a series of new discoveries in the follow-up research process that will make up for and fill in the gaps. However, the current situation is like this. Gentlemen, this is the problem that we have discovered and urgently need to solve. That's all. Silence followed by silence. The group of specters in the virtual reality world didn't speak at all. They were all evaluating in their minds or simply calming themselves down. Only after a full 10 seconds did Herman make a simple conclusion. If I understand correctly, Jeff, what you're saying is that this fellow Luo Nan not only created a new product that could possibly replace the dynamo core, but he also created an extremely targeted cracking tool. That Sand Demon. That stupid fellow. His existence can effectively counter the archetype format's theoretical and technological system? Bald Jeff's expression didn't change. His smile was like a fake shell. The results of our current observations are, the effectiveness of the format domain is clearly reduced on the Sand Demon. Herman's chest tightened again. He found it hard to continue for a while. However, a drowning man would always randomly pull himself up. Herman's gaze swept around randomly in an attempt to find inspiration. In the end, he really did manage to hook onto something. No, Jeff. things might not be as bad as you say. Look, this virtual reality world that you guys created is really amazing. Even though Luo Nan created everything in front of us, I'm thinking that he might not be able to fully grasp the various kinds of information flowing in here because this is our own accumulation. Bald Jeff raised his eyebrows, and then, the information you guys control is getting richer and richer. You're fully following up on the entire situation. Your predictions are accurate. It looks like the relevant models are already in place. I'm not talking about the format space. I'm talking about that thing. Herman pointed at the focal point on the beach. Can you guys also create that thing? Jeff looked at where Herman's finger was pointing and immediately laughed. His laugh was strange. You're talking about the sand demon. That's right. Herman gradually straightened out his train of thought regarding the convergence of soul light. His finger turned and pointed at sea-gazing youth at the end of the beach. I feel that this fellow has already explained in great detail regarding the cultivation of the sand demon. The direction is also very clear. With Deep Blue and Tianqi's technological accumulation and Mr. Li Wei's ability, we can imitate him and rapidly reverse engineer the entire system. Can't we do it? I remember Luo Nan saying that this is ultimately a matter of probability. Our accumulation in artificial intelligence is quite considerable. Even if our methods aren't as wild as his, as long as we're willing to invest resources, we should be able to produce a result by burning it. The more Herman spoke, the more reliable he felt. He gradually became excited. If we can really burn a sand demon out, then some problems can be easily solved. At the very least, it can become an imaginary enemy. Through the conflict with the format space, it can push back the flaws in our research and make improvements. Perhaps we can use this to turn a crisis into an opportunity and take a large step forward. He heavily slammed his fist against his palm. His entire train of thought was thoroughly connected. All he needed was applause. Everything you said is correct, Mr. Herman. Bald Jeff maintained his smile and slowly nodded. He spoke words of agreement, but there weren't any ups and downs. There was a lack of resonance between his emotions. There are no problems with your words on a macro level. I'm even thinking that Luo Nan probably had this aspect in mind when he conducted such a crazy demonstration experiment. He's also researching a few specific problems. But there's one thing. Luo Nan has hidden it very well from beginning to end. Most people, including you, haven't discovered it. Herman frowned. What's he hiding? It's the gourd that you mentioned. The gourd that we need to earnestly imitate. It's still hidden deep within Professor Luo's skull. He's never taken it out. Baldy Jeff casually clicked and selected all of the words that Luo Nan had written on the blackboard for the past 3 hours. These words made one's eyes dizzy and made one's heart explode with high-level information. They lit up one after another in the virtual reality environment and were arranged according to the order in which they appeared. They looked much more orderly and soon attracted the gazes of the other participants. It's a very outstanding blackboard writing. It's a very complete process. It's a very detailed calculation. Right? But I must say that this is nothing more than a child's toy. Herman gasped. Didn't he display every step of the experiment? He only displayed different levels of standard answers as well as the conventional logical connections between the answers. He told you that you can deduce the next answer from this answer. He even displayed the concrete steps and graphical models. It looked very beautiful, very deep, and very real, right? But this is just a facade, Mr. Herman. Look at this sand demon. We predicted its behavior very accurately. It's as if we grasped everything about it. But did you know that we used the ant colony algorithm that was invented in the last century? We did a simple simulation calculation. Why is it like this? Because the typical appearance of this idiot's movements is that it's highly attuned to the natural ant colony. But is it an ant colony? Or is it a set of sensors? Or is it just pure virtual data? In the end, it only displays an approximate projection in our experience and logical system. It conforms to our common sense and basic logic, making us believe that we understand and grasp it. But what is its essence? No one knows. What's the point of this? We don't need standard answers and phenomenal projections. What we need is Luo Nan's core thinking to deduce an answer from random results. A complete system that can support this miracle. But on this point, that guy is so tight-lipped. Or perhaps, his thinking is on a completely different level from ours. Chapter 975. It seemed that Baldy Jeff's true mood wasn't too good under his calm and natural expression. His voice and the speed of his speech were increasing. Herman, who came to his side, was like a target that took the initiative to come up and get scolded. Luckily, Herman's sacrifice was worth it. Baldy Jeff's mood calmed down a bit after spitting out a string of words. His gaze swept across the specters in the virtual reality world and his tone became a bit gentler. What a gentleman said just now was quite correct. An artificial intelligence of the same level, from breeding to production, requires an enormous amount of material and data. This is a price that must be paid in the rules of our cognition. If we can't see supercomputers, special power transmission lines, and power plants by Luo Nan's side, then we need to find a matching replacement that can withstand comparison and measurement. Of course, it can be a completely new, revolutionary system. If Luo Nan really takes out these things, then as a researcher, I might prostrate myself in worship. However, the system that I prostrate myself in worship is absolutely not this one. In the end, Herman's expression wasn't too good. He forcefully replied, "Those formulas. The vast majority of them are empirical formulas, and the repetition rate isn't even 5%. Mr. Herman, can you derive the current mathematical system of Earth from 5% of the empirical formulas in the limited field?" Herman shrugged his shoulders and went completely silent. But there were other participants who were filled with righteous indignation. According to what you said, if everything Luo Nan said is just to fool people, then why do we need to cooperate with him? Why do we need to play tacit understanding with him? Let's just announce it to the entire world and expose his tricks. Let him lose all standing and reputation. Baldy Jeff's lips twitched. Oh, I forgot to say. Empirical formulas are still formulas. Concrete applications are concrete applications. The concrete configurations that Luo Nan talked about are really useful on a practical level. For ability users, their extraordinary powers aren't that precise. Especially their conscious activities. They have a high tolerance for mistakes and strong adaptive abilities. I believe that as long as one has the guts, the effort, and a bit more luck, one can try to imitate, adjust, and adapt. One can realize sufficient interference between the material and the mental. There are still some people who can use some examples in real cultivation. In this sense, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Luo Nan's lecture today is extremely valuable. Someone couldn't help but roll his eyes. You've said everything. Since it can be used, why can't we use it to make a bet and burn the sand demon out? Once one succeeds, will the others be far behind? Sir, I understand what you mean. Of course, there's a possibility that a handful of sand will fall down and become a sand monster. Plus, Luo Nan's 2 hours of public lectures have cut off many meaningless routes for us. Is that right? The smile on Baldy Jeff's face deepened. If you bet on probability, you might succeed in 10 billion, but you might also be the first. Alright, all projects need a feasibility study report. If I were the one drafting it, I would probably write, "Please prepare to invest in another Deep Blue, okay?" The bicker was stunned for 2 seconds before he became even more displeased. You're exaggerating. No, it's just that I think there's something wrong with the frame of reference you've chosen. The sand demons are something that we don't understand. It's very likely to involve research on the spiritual level, so it's very difficult to make a good conversion. We'd better find a purely physical equivalent, such as the supercomputers and power plants mentioned earlier. A handful of sand flew up. The probability of becoming a supercomputer and a power plant. Have you considered it? You're quibbling. The bicker was so angry that his specter body was about to explode, but what could he do? Jeff, who came from the Deep Blue Laboratory, was one of the people who had the least position to support Luo Nan. His explanation was to boost Luo Nan's ambition and extinguish his own prestige. It could only prove his impartial academic standpoint. Luo Nan brought heavy pressure to Deep Blue and Tianqi. Herman didn't have anything else to say. He let out a low curse. He wasn't targeting anyone. He was just venting his emotions. However, a sharp voice suddenly rose up from a location a bit further away. Kill him. The entire Spectre community suddenly went silent, allowing this extremely low-pitched howl to spread out even more. It reverberated back and forth, causing ripples in everyone's hearts. The person who spoke first felt that he had lost his composure a bit. He did his best to make up for it. He clearly didn't release any goodwill. You can imagine what he'll do next. We need to prepare for the worst. Once he said that, quite a number of people agreed with him. Yes, we need to set up a fuse mechanism. The simplest method, the most straightforward method, is the method with the least losses. We don't reject this line of thought. Perhaps we can continue to perfect it. If we can find a reliable executor, perhaps I'll vote for it. They were a group of red-eyed gamblers. Herman steadied his hand. He didn't say anything at this stage. He looked at these specters with cold eyes. They were doing their best to create a sense of social interaction with a premeditated murder. It must be said that Herman's head was quite high before. His anxious state had lasted for nearly 3 hours. But it could be said that this was a poison and a cure. He heard the emotional shouts and saw these losers who had clearly lost their composure. An indescribable sense of comfort and superiority spontaneously arose from the bottom of his heart, helping him to slowly calm down. Herman was able to understand the mentality of the participants. After a long period of investment, the distant bloodline project aside, the Deep Blue project had already reached its payback period. Especially with the support of the Deep Blue platform, the military's counterattack in the wilderness had achieved victory after victory. Such battle results helped them crazily attract customers from the military and megacorporations. They watched as the Deep Blue platform and the corresponding burner modification model practically became the absolute standard, sweeping the entire global market. Many of these people had already invested large sums of money many years in advance. They gambled on the layout of related industries. Who would just step on one side if they could earn money from two things? Luo Nan suddenly appeared at this time, forcefully breaking the vigorous momentum of the Deep Blue project. He even launched a damned substitute product, directly shaking the foundation of the Deep Blue project. Think about it. At the beginning of today's live broadcast, quite a few people still held the thought of borrowing strength to fight strength. They wanted to give pressure to the two laboratories, Deep Blue and Tianqi. Of course, they wanted to give pressure to Teacher Li Wei, but Luo Nan was good. He directly smashed the house down. His actions were extremely intense. It was hard for anyone to remain calm when faced with him. Didn't that fellow say that he was carrying out a diplomatic operation? Was he going to burn down trillions of dollars in diplomacy? Or was he going to completely abandon the capital circle and specialize in the military and political system? This was far too willful. If Luo Nan was truly a pure researcher, he would really dare to play like this. He would be crushed to death if he said he was a once-in-a-thousand-years genius. His grandfather was a good example. But the problem was that Luo Nan wasn't. Right now, Luo Nan had the qualifications to be willful. Luo Nan was clearly being unreasonable. Didn't an opponent like Herman have to rack his brains to find a reasonable explanation? Herman's mind was rich with activity. The more he thought, the more ridiculous and laughable it was. But in a certain sense, the more he thought, the more he understood. He wasn't just blindly pondering in his mind. He had already exchanged opinions with Wang Yu in private before. She had also raised a suggestion. His understanding wasn't too clear when he was intoxicated before. But now it was different. According to Wang Yu's suggestion, Herman's gaze anchored to a person. Director Mao. This extraordinary life form that stood at the apex of human evolution hadn't spoken for a long time. His behavior was extremely unsociable. Right now, he was strolling by himself on the beach. He held a conjured coffee cup that didn't quite fit the scene. He gazed at the seashore. The end of his gaze was Luo Nan. Right now, Luo Nan had disrupted the situation and pacified the woman. He appeared to be completely uninvolved in the matter. He crossed his arms and faced the surging tide and mist of the sea. The chain of gazes and attention made Herman realize something. There was no need for him to make blind guesses about what Luo Nan was considering. But from what he understood, Director Mao's gaze might contain contemplation, interest, and balance, but he couldn't see any particularly extreme emotions. And so, Herman had a clear idea of what was going on. True big shots who were related to benefits and had the ability to execute were all like this. Why did he need to forcefully stick his head out? In this matter, the old man at home was the one who was anxious. He was young. He had a lot of time. Why did he need to do this? There was also Wang Yu. That truly slippery fellow. He needed to go back and exchange information with her. Only then could he make a final judgment. Herman's mind calmed down, and his mind became clearer. A few thoughts came in a torrent, but they sank and filtered. He suddenly felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint where the problem was. Someone suddenly spoke up not too far from his side at this time. And this person raised his hand very politely. I want to ask, Dr. Jeff. Where's the fake goods? Ha! This speech was extremely incompatible with the current atmosphere filled with killing intent. It jumped around too much, so much so that most people didn't understand what was going on. The person who raised his hand continued to raise his hand, making himself even more conspicuous. I'm saying that we should take reference from that sand demon. No matter what method or system we use, we should only make something with similar functions. Even if it's just for show, what should we do? With Deep Blue and Tianqi's accumulations, can't we even make something that looks good? Something that looks good. Bold Jeff turned his gaze and recognized the person who had spoken. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. In reality, this person was quite easy to recognize. He had a tonnage that exceeded that of an ordinary person, a fluffy and lush beard, and a shiny skull that seemed to have come from the same assembly line as Jeff. He looked to be in the prime of his life, but his identity more or less contradicted his appearance. He was the senior representative of the LCRF's elderly group at this conference. Of course, his other identity was even more subtle. Jeff didn't point it out. He just maintained a smile on his face. I don't quite understand what you mean, Mr. Barty. Chapter 976. Barty was the representative of the LCRF in this conference. He was the largest of the specters in the current environment. It was quite miraculous that he was able to maintain an extremely low profile. He didn't speak or make an appearance. It was as if he was hidden outside the range of everyone's attention. But when he truly entered the spotlight, he displayed an extremely high level of ability to express himself. He spoke with fervor and assurance. The current situation is that the influence of Luo Nan's show has already been created. If the situation continues to develop, he will soon become an authority in the relevant field. Bald Jeff reminded politely, he already is, Mr. Barty. We can't deliberately underestimate him. There was a sting in these words. In certain circles, there were no secrets. The other participants began to wake up one after another. The fat and strong faction before them had a subtle and bizarre stance. He was once a world-renowned trader. He was a high-ranking representative of the LCRF. However, his most solid identity right now was that of an investment manager under Her Majesty Empress Wu. He had signed a contract and received a salary. Originally, this didn't count for much. Aside from capital, what sort of stance was there to speak of? But right now, that damned peerless stream on the beach was still going on. An enormous dark cloud of deficit was quickly forming and enveloping the top of their heads. At this very moment, Barty's appearance made a lot of sense. Barty completely ignored the peculiar gazes of the others. He continued to speak. But he's far from being a tycoon. He has no foundation in the academic world. He doesn't have any effective economic support. Oh, I know you're talking about the Blood Flame Order and the Castle Financial Group. But the Castle Financial Group is far from entering the coarse circle of the world. Otherwise, we would probably be shaking hands with Lady Halder right now and discussing grand plans together. Even if there's no lady, there's still the Queen. She's lacked love since she was young. She might have a taste for this. Some people were purely venting their emotions. Their comments were harsh and unoriginal. There were also people who pinched their noses as they discussed. They ridiculed. You want to play the same old trick and create another Luo Yuandao scientific ethics case. A showdown between formatting theory and the archetype format. Come on. Can a crazy old man who only knows how to toss and turn in the wilderness compare to this extraordinary who is an authority in configuration and soul science? He can't be here to make a fool of himself, right? Whether it was a strange tone or a look of disdain or rejection, none of the poisonous spikes could pierce through Barty's skin. He pretended not to hear anything. He only stared at the bald Jeff. Try, just try. What have we sacrificed? We're not going to recreate the Deep Blue project and carry out that hopeless reverse engineering. It's just for show. Furthermore, did I say that we're going to engage in that kind of internal strife? In our circle, why should we care about the dirty things in academia? We clearly have our own advantages. Advantage? More and more people joined in. At the very least, listening to it wouldn't cause any harm. Facing such a terrible situation, they really needed more comprehensive insights to help them make decisions. His doubts about his position could be put aside for the time being. Barty's bright smile could not be hidden by his thick beard. His body language was also very exaggerated. He rotated his elbows forcefully, moving his forearms and wrists, as if he wanted to stir everyone's brains. That's right, that's our advantage. We're businessmen. We're powerful businessmen. We only need a barely passable product for show. It was a barely passable product. We could launch a similar product in the academic world, in the inner world, and even in the market. We didn't even need to be particularly brilliant. With our influence, we could set off a raging storm. We could completely suppress the influence Luo Nan caused today. What do you think, Dr. Jeff? What was this? The group of ghosts looked at each other in dismay. They thought they were watching a clumsy, low-IQ stage play. Baldy Jeff didn't want to answer, but Barty kept staring at him. He could only grin. Mr. Barty, I think it's just for show. Let alone Luo Nan, even the military and government's purchasing agents wouldn't pay any attention to it. You really aren't professional enough in the non-professional field, Jeff. You can't use the eyes of a technician to view the world. Barty's eloquence was torrential. With a wave of his hand, he seized back control. Or perhaps his voice was the loudest. Body language was the most exaggerated. What's our advantage? Is it our strength? No. It's our influence. It's our reputation. It's our system. The high-tech companies and cutting-edge laboratories under our banner represent the correct direction of Earth's scientific research system. The military and government don't just look at a single technology when purchasing or cooperating. In the end, they need a complete system that covers research, development, marketing, after-sales, upgrades, and so on. Because they are a system as well. They have countless hands and mouths in the open and in the dark. All of these must be satisfied and in place. What does Luo Nan have when compared to the system we've launched and endorsed? Is he a technology that might come from an advanced alien civilization? Even if he is, can he digest all of this technology and turn it into cash? It's impossible, sirs. He definitely doesn't have the resources and system we have. The example Jeff gave just now was excellent. A single sand demon is equivalent to an entire supercomputer and a nuclear power plant. Then how many resources and benefits are needed to carry the technology system of this sand demon before it can be turned into cash? Herman watched as Barty easily doubled the volume of an example that he had been using in turn. He wanted to laugh a little, but the two keywords at the end of Barty's words immediately pierced his heart. Turn into cash. Benefits. Barty was extremely sharp. He turned his body in an instant and tightly grasped this crucial thread of thought. That's right, Mr. Herman. Everyone, please note that I'm using the extended meaning of turn into cash. For a new technology to be turned into cash, it has to go from the brain to the laboratory to the factory to enter the market to enter thousands of households. Finally, it can be popularized throughout the world. The most crucial element has been completely locked down since the industrial age. That's right. It's benefits. This world has always revolved around benefits, not technology. Or perhaps it could be said that the greatest technology is how to realize benefits. It has always been like this. Those who were good at emphasizing would always gain the upper hand in public. This wasn't determined by the tightness of logic. It was to the extent that some people's rebuttals lacked confidence, but if the technology itself can bring enormous benefits, where is it? Where are the benefits? The military and political systems of the world's 88 mega-cities. The public expenditures of over 100 million people. Where are their benefits reflected? Is it in the brain of a young genius that doesn't belong to the dimension of reality? Or is it in the capital alliance that covers 80% of the world's economic volume? Gentlemen, the truth is that it is impossible for Luo Nan to satisfy the astronomical demand of benefits for an enormous system. And if this process is accompanied by a zero-sum game, it will form a sharp, rippling, and extremely wide-ranging conflict. Uncontrollable conflicts. What would the current rulers choose? Oh, I nearly forgot. Many of you seated here are equivalent to rulers. Is everyone's ultimate goal to take a step further in arming our already victorious armies into superhumans that can fly through the sky and burrow through the earth? Is it to sweep across the continents and oceans, and then trample the solar system? Or is it to have a global reshuffle, to let the new technology drive a new revolution, to let new rulers step onto the stage of history? Don't joke around. The ruling rulers have always thought about a booming market, a high employment rate, an increase in votes, an extension of tenure, asset appreciation, and the expansion of power and stability. This is the mainstream of society. This is the beautiful dream weaved together by billions of ordinary people. In the face of this great trend, a mere one or two new technologies have no foundation, no support, no industry, and no employees. It is as if it fell from the sky. How long would it take to digest it? How long would it take to cultivate it? Who would care about it? Don't be anxious, gentlemen. This world is always changing, but the most essential things are still the ones that govern the operation of society. And we are the manipulators that are adept at using them. This is our advantage, and it is also our essence. For us, this is the best era. We can stand in front of the stage, we can hide behind the scenes, we can be on the left, we can be on the right. As long as we grasp this essential advantage and let it flow into everyone's blood vessels and thoughts, we are the gods of the secular world. What in the world can stump us? The atmosphere in the virtual reality became particularly subtle. It was a bit restless, a bit absent-minded, a bit deep, and a bit awkward. Even though everyone present was a billion-dollar tycoon or a promising future candidate, they were still a bit embarrassed when they were suddenly praised in the face. By the end of Barty's passionate speech, the original theme had long since flown to who knows where, but there was a touch of returning to the natural state. It was exaggerated to the extreme, and it would most likely cause people to reflect. At the very least, Herman was touched and came to a realization. No wonder. He felt that something was wrong just now. It turned out that the two people who spoke the most were, Jeff was imperceptibly selling anxiety. Barty was exaggeratedly pouring chicken soup. The two of them were opposites, and in the end, all they were selling was their butts. Speaking of which, how did Her Majesty Empress Wu manage to stuff this fat-headed, big-eared fellow into this extremely important video conference? Splendid beyond compare. Herman didn't even have time to share this realization with others before someone on the beach of virtual reality loudly exclaimed in admiration. Perhaps it was because of the lingering charm of the previous speech, but the person's description was quite high-profile. However, the person who spoke was none other than the true big shot of today's conference, Director Mao. This independent director of Quantum Corporation could be said to have the most right to speak. He could gather everyone's attention the moment he opened his mouth. Next, he raised his glass and indicated to a certain person in the crowd, "Today, the most interesting thought I've heard came from Luo Nan. And the most wonderful explanation belongs to none other than you." Herman's eyelids twitched. The person Director Mao raised his glass to was Barty. Inclination. The most crucial inclination. Barty didn't say anything. He didn't explain anything. He just bowed slightly. However, in the eyes of others, at least in Herman's eyes, this sudden diplomatic encounter had clearly drawn swords against each other. Blood was flowing like a river. Chapter 977. In a group environment, people's thoughts should be connected in a certain sense. Aside from thoughts and emotions, there was also the virus. If one was infected, no one would be able to escape. Herman was one of the first to realize this. Then this small insight seemed to form a kind of mental magnetic field. Because of Director Mao's deliberate intensification, the others were infected one after another, giving rise to a similar reaction. Everyone's gazes first focused on Barty and then drifted to Jeff. There was no need to mention the former. Jeff's smiling face never seemed to change. But now they looked at this calm and unruffled face that was neither servile nor overbearing. More and more people let out a long "oh" in their hearts. They actually fell for it. It couldn't be helped. No one would have thought that Deep Blue and Apocalypse Laboratory, who had always been proud and arrogant, would suddenly play this hand. It must be known that Luo Nan had used cage theory to reorganize the mental C model. He had used configuration theory to peel off the skin of Dynamo Core technology. He had stepped on the results of Deep Blue Laboratory to climb to the top, but Deep Blue Laboratory didn't have any particularly extreme reactions. At most, Deep Blue had advanced Dynamo Core technology by 2 generations. The new functions displayed not only proved the deep accumulation of technology, but they also absorbed part of the results of Luo Nan's blood intent ring fortress, allowing the functionality of the formatting domain to advance a step further. Everyone believed that this kind of high profile would continue forever. The deeper they understood Teacher Li Wei's abilities and background, the easier it was to form this kind of mindset. But today, this mindset was suddenly broken. Was Bald Jeff's behavior his own decision, or did it represent the will of Teacherly Wei? If it was the latter, what did this mean? What did Director Mao's reaction mean? All sorts of thoughts were like the gurgling soup in a large pot. They transformed into complex tastes that were hard to describe. Of course, the most important point of reference was still Director Mao. Director Mao had always been one of the strongest supporters of Deep Blue and Apocalypse Laboratory. But what was the reasoning behind today's sharp and direct change? Was it an act? Was his heart beating erratically occasionally? Or was this the beginning of an even greater change? Herman subconsciously wanted to contact Wang Yu again. After all, Director Mao's situation was too special. He was the spokesperson of Capital, and he was also a peak expert of the inner world. His identities were nearly perfect. Although the Gold Can't Exchange, Jean Finga and the recent Her Majesty Empress Wu also had great achievements in the business world, they were not as smooth and natural as him. Even someone like Madame Halder would have to wait. Because of this, he was an iconic figure. Damn, the problem has become even more complicated. Everyone's imagination ran wild, and it was destined that they could not make decisions on behalf of Director Mao, and the situation would not change according to their will. At that moment, Director Mao spoke again and asked Barty, "What you said at the end was too vague. Do you have a more practical operation?" Barty was like an experienced customer manager, putting on a professional smile. "Chairman Mao, which one would you like to operate?" "I'm very interested in the techniques of the Sand Demons." "Let's work together," Barty replied directly, not bothering to hide anything. "What you just said should be competition. To be more precise, it's not a competition. Therefore, our final destination is to let it return to its normal track, to vacate the cage for a bird, to reincarnate in a corpse. If you need skills, just ask him." Barty adeptly used idioms and adeptly entered into persuasion mode. Luo Nan has never experienced hardship since he was young. He doesn't have much sensitivity towards money. What he wants are some superficial things, such as respect, understanding, tranquility. It's the easiest to deal with. We don't even need to connect with him. If we maintain a certain distance, he might even be happy. Someone couldn't help but ask, "Then how do we talk about cooperation?" "Just find his secretary, spokesperson, and the like." "Find you." Everyone cursed in their hearts. It was unknown whether Barty had received it or not. Director Mao declined to comment. He asked an even more sensitive question, Deep Blue Laboratory and Apocalypse Laboratory. "What should we do?" This wasn't within the scope of Barty's answer, but he took on the responsibility and responded just as bluntly. "Just cooperate. We're all investors and partners. We've been working together happily for so many years. What's wrong with continuing?" The group of specters exchanged glances. Quite a few of them were a bit embarrassed. They had similar emotions, but they had different reasons. That's right, all they had to do was cooperate. It was that simple. They couldn't play with a monopoly, but hedging was also excellent. It seemed a bit more practical. Besides, Instructor Li Wei had overseen the Deep Blue world these past few years, presiding over 2 major research projects. He could call the wind and summon the rain, and his words were absolute. He was just like a god. Shouldn't there be some other power to suppress him? Isn't this returning to the original idealized plan? After going around in a big circle, things were back to square one. Most people didn't feel that the torment they experienced on the road was a waste. Instead, they felt that this was a typical spiraling process of understanding. Their self-awareness deepened by another level. This was comfortable. Of course, the most important thing was that someone walked in front of them and took on the sharpest contradiction. Director Mao spoke a few words a second later. Or perhaps it was just an emotional sigh of his own life configuration transformation. Configuration transformation into life. Most people knew that this jumped back to Luo Nan's interesting thoughts, but no one could follow up. This was because the vast majority of people couldn't reach the corresponding depth. They didn't have the guts to ask or argue. In the end, Director Mao found Jeff himself. Can we draw on a similar train of thought for the Bloodline project? Can we conduct such research? A stick poked into the completely unrelated Bloodline project. Some people were confused, and some people came to a sudden realization. They only heard Director Mao say, "From what I remember, Li Wei mentioned a similar direction, but he didn't say anything else. I suggest that you guys take advantage of the heat and come up with a clear plan. Whether it succeeds or not, everyone can discuss it. Wouldn't that be great?" It was a solid hammer. The dagger was revealed. So it turned out that Director Mao was dissatisfied with the Apocalypse Laboratory's toothpaste squeezing progress. Bold Jeff revealed a smile that lacked sincerity. "I don't understand the specifics of the situation. After all." Director Mao interrupted him. "I understand. We'll have a good chat with Li Wei. But remember, life may have a certain stubborn tendency, but it doesn't have resources. It's even more impossible to have capital." He glanced at Luo Nan on the beach once more after speaking. Then he disappeared like a bubble and exited from virtual reality. The others weren't so straightforward. Many people looked at Bald Jeff, and some people looked at Barty. No matter which one it was, there were many things that needed to be communicated, discussed, threatened, and cooperated. The conference had come to a conclusion, but it wasn't over yet, right? They had to return to what they were best at, even if it wasn't easy to perform in public. When the number of participants in a conference exceeded a certain limit, it would naturally go to two extremes. One was a tedious and boring format. The other was a rambling quarrel. People didn't need to go through a beating in society to have this kind of awareness. To be able to hold a successful conference with an excess number of participants could only prove that the average IQ of the participants was relatively high, or that there was a powerful controller. It would be best if both were present. But in the current conference that Meng Chong was participating in, it seemed that neither was quite enough. Right now, he was in the coastal direction of Zeolite Beach, inside the Aber Manor that belonged to the Blood Flame Order. All of the Blood Flame Order's current higher-ups in D City were gathered here. The core decision-making circle that was already clear back in Xia City. The local power faction of D City that had already been purged once. Even Deputy First Oblatum Ian Lo, who was far away in Ban City, was participating remotely. Of course, the main topic of the conference wasn't to discuss whether or not to send people to assist. There was no value in discussing this at all. Did his order have any capital to say no? When all was said and done, this conference itself shouldn't have happened. However, on Zeolite Beach, Luo Nan had been teaching for a long time, making it hard for people to breathe. The Blood Flame Order didn't even have the chance to go up and express their loyalty. They only had enough time to send people to replenish 10 sets of syncopators in the middle. In addition, there was an entire circle of burners surrounding them. The order was more or less repelled by them. Frankly speaking, in terms of average quality, even if the followers they pulled out were elites, they were still a cut below those burners. The prepared team couldn't be pulled out in a short time, so they would just study. They would listen to Meng Chong's spirit and carry out research and discussion. They would also refer to Luo Nan's live stream of lectures to find and fill in the gaps. The problem was that when everyone gathered together and talked at once, a dispute would ensue. In the end, how would they complete the mission that Mr. Luo Nan had given them? An extremely irritable big fellow. An instinctive desire to destroy everything. A burning feeling of extreme thirst. Admittedly, these descriptions carried more concrete guidance suggestions. There were some configuration references, but in the end, there were no standard answers. Everyone had their own areas of expertise, and everyone had their own opinions. And all of this was followed by Luo Nan's subsequent series of demonstration experiments. Even more new ideas were induced. At the very least, they had to rely on Mr. Luo Nan's train of thought. Then, how should the life solvent belonging to the big fellow be expressed? How should the participants cooperate and combine? The order didn't have a formatting domain. Could they use the Blood Soul Temple to replace it? How should they replace it? Everyone said they were reasonable, and everyone said they were reasonable. No one could convince the other on some key issues. Gradually, the situation went out of control. Speaking of the people from Xia City, there was really no way for them to quarrel. Jiang Yuan was a theorist, yes, but his cultivation wasn't good enough. He could tinker with doctrines, but when it came to cultivation, he was purely there to make up the numbers. Wu Kuei might not even be able to say a single word all year round. Yin Li's environment wasn't suitable. As for Meng Chong, he was still dizzy from Luo Nan's teachings. He hadn't recovered yet. The ones who were truly arguing were the people from T City and the elites of the order, who could enter the battlefield at any time. Their attitudes were actually okay. What they said were all very practical technical problems. However, these problems were produced in a strange and unfriendly environment of a new system. There was no one who could answer them. So when the first problem popped up, a series of problems followed. In the end, it became a mess. It made the organizers and managers of the meeting feel extremely awkward. If there was a powerful person who could control the situation, who could effectively collect questions and immediately give answers, the current situation wouldn't have happened. The problem was that there was no such person. Chapter 978. In the end, Yinla decided to ignore it and went offline with the excuse that she had something to deal with. Under such circumstances, Jiang Yuanjun and Wu Kuei couldn't be counted on. Meng Chong had tried to integrate the two arguments, but to no avail. Thus, he didn't want to waste his efforts and let them argue on their own. He only stared at the live broadcast on the beach, waiting for a suitable opportunity to bring this bunch of disappointing things over. Meng Chong sighed silently. At this moment, he looked at the chaotic formatting domain on the beach, at the format fire that burned from time to time, and at the stupid sand that was becoming more and more like a living creature. His thoughts gradually drifted away. It must be said that he had been a witness to Luo Nan's format of fire before the others had arrived at Zeolite Beach. But how should he put it? At the time, that special flame had lit up with the deep blue walker as a medium. Meng Chong had even believed that it was a substitute method. But the various abilities that Luo Nan displayed afterwards gave him an impact that ultimately exceeded the upper limits of what his normal thinking could endure. Not to mention what happened on the beach, that person also had the identity of Mr. Mo. The power he displayed in Band City was clearly the highest quality of the Blood Flame Order. Why? Talent and genius were no longer enough to explain it. Then, Chong, you also have to say a few words. Don't let these people act too presumptuously. Jiang Yuanjun, who couldn't stand the chaotic situation, came over to his side. Her words were tough, but in fact, she just wanted a moment of peace. Meng Chong forced a smile as a response. Jiang Yuanjun sighed again and chuckled softly, I'm old. It's fine if my legs aren't as nimble as before, but my brain can't keep up either. In the future, we still have to run faster. May the will of the blood flame protect us. The voice suddenly stopped, and the old man was lost in thought. At this time, Meng Chong should have said a few words of comfort, but when the words came to his mouth, he said, it's the same. Both of them fell silent again. In this chaotic debate, the two higher-ups of the Blood Flame Order couldn't see that it wasn't just their own powerlessness. Instead, it was the awkward situation of their order's cultivation theories and doctrines being unable to explain or even settle in front of a truly majestic opponent. The core problem was, should he use the order's blood flame will to forcefully make peace with Mr. Luo Nan's theory? Or should he use Mr. Luo Nan's theory to directly explain the blood flame will? In fact, the answer was very clear. How many times had the blood flame will appeared in this round of meetings that made people dizzy from all the noise? The blood flame order was a relatively pure religion. They didn't have any messy beliefs, nor were they so particular. But if the foundation of trust in one's own philosophy was shaken, how could one begin to explain the philosophy? Could it be that the blood flame order was ultimately going to be like a fire of emotions that came and went without a trace in the darkness, silently dissipating on the eve of the arrival of true light? Meng Chong had never felt that he was a particularly devout follower. He had joined the blood flame order with the identity of a security captain, withstood the so-called blood flame will's test, narrowly escaping death many times to reach his current position. The source of his inner strength didn't seem to have much to do with the blood flame will. However, at this stage, he was still a little absent-minded. Especially when Luo Nan experienced the profoundness of emotions that flowed freely from the beach. He unconsciously muttered to himself, observing the world with the eternal laws, changing other people's views is not a good way of learning. The old man's ears were very sharp. He could tell that Meng Chong's expression was born out of Spinoza's most famous phrase, seeing things under the eternal laws. The words used to describe the current Luo Nan seemed passable on the surface, but the core was clearly different. Moreover, using the religious explanation of a devout Christian to make a judgment on the current situation was ultimately inappropriate. Meng Chong was startled when he saw old Master Jiang become serious once more. Then he laughed. But before he could respond, a voice suddenly rang out in the deepest part of his mind. The saint believes that he is the ruler of the world. This kind of bootlicking will be even more resounding. The method and content of the telepathic transmission were a bit discordant, but this wasn't the main point. The main point was the person who transmitted the telepathic transmission. First oblatum. Meng Chong's mind was shaken, and he subconsciously straightened his body. Jiang Yuanjin, who was beside him, did a similar action, but he sprained his old waist because he was too intense. Without a doubt, this was Mrs. Halder's telepathic transmission. It was just that there was no telepathic transmission after these words. Instead, a violent rumble arose in an even deeper and more sensitive domain. The Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss District. Some of the other people in the conference room had reactions similar to Meng Chong's. There were also some who were muddled from beginning to end. But no matter which one it was, the elites selected by these orders were more or less linked to the Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss District in countless ways, directly or indirectly. When the foundation of the order underwent an intense change, no one could stay out of it. In the time of a breath or two, the originally clamorous conference room became so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. The vast majority of people only had a feeling in their hearts, but they were still ignorant of the concrete situation. Only people like Meng Chong, Wu Kuei, and Yin Lu, who was several thousand kilometers away, had sufficient cultivation and authority. Only the higher-ups of the order were able to sense it a step further. The turbulence came from the lowest level of the Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss District. It was a lake of lava that was condensed from the intense accumulation of negative emotions. What are you all hesitating for? Just execute according to what he said. We clearly have the lively substrate at the lowest level. Mobilize it. Mrs. Halder's telepathic transmission was like an unsheathed blade. Compared to her usual ruthless decisiveness, it was more concise and straightforward. Even if you're stupid to the point of being incurable, you still need to display your value. Ha! On Zeolite Beach, Luo Nan raised his eyebrows. He felt an unusual wave of restlessness from the depths of the Abyss District. It was extremely significant. His control over the Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss District exceeded practically everyone in the world. Of course he knew what this represented. He even knew the key driving force behind this wave of change. Mrs. Halder had woken up. However, she didn't seem to have any intentions of immediately exiting. She also didn't directly communicate with Luo Nan. Luo Nan didn't insist on this. This wave of assistance had already saved him some effort. Wind blew over from the surface of the sea. It carried a slight fishy smell, as well as some scattered remnants of mist. Luo Nan looked at the seemingly unchanged mist on the surface of the sea. It was as if the mist was surging and churning all the time. He silently calculated. He looked at the 5 pieces of the jigsaw puzzle and their current degree of completeness. The standard relay station array and the Hellfire Tyrant. These 2 pieces were gradually on the right track. The magneto-optical mica. Yes, wretched development. The vile environment and the overall spacetime environment. This would depend on fate. Overall, there was still quite a bit of difference. However, this sort of piecing and organizing wasn't a linear process. Especially the first 2 pieces. They needed to rely on external forces when piecing them together. They were all broken up and needed to be reorganized and combed anew. However, as long as the foundation was solid, it would naturally be a different situation. Luo Nan let out a long breath and turned around. He saw Zhang Yingying doing her best to cheer Dumb Sand on. It looked like a scene of a family trip. She was having a great time. Luo Nan really couldn't treat the so-called son as a joke. However, if Zhang Yingying had to provide for this idiot all day long in the future, she would have to expend a great deal of mental energy. Just the daily supply of energy was enough to drag down her cultivation, let alone anything else. Luo Nan really did put in quite a bit of thought in order to resolve this matter satisfactorily. He seriously pondered over a method, prepared his words, and prepared everything. Only then did he call out. "Hey, Sister Yingying. I'm going to ask you again. Are you really determined to raise him?" "Of course I'm going to raise him." Zhang Yingying didn't hesitate at all in the beginning. She spoke resolutely and decisively, but a thought seemed to flash in the middle. It was unknown what she was thinking about. She became slightly absent-minded, and her momentum immediately suffered a setback. Luo Nan was puzzled. "What's wrong?" "Well, I'm going to ask you something. Dumb Sand is just an example given in class, right? Is there anything else? I mean, are there any other uses?" Luo Nan was startled for a moment, then he laughed. "I have to say there are." Zhang Yingying pursed her lips. She glanced at the distant Dumb Sand, but she soon withdrew her gaze. She wanted to say something, but in the end, she didn't say anything. Luo Nan already understood her thoughts. It was more or less outside of his expectations, but it also made him let out a sigh of relief. Sure enough, it was still the Zhang Yingying he knew. She was usually casual, but when she truly encountered something, she would never act according to her temper. She was clearly 100 times more attentive to Dumb Sand, but she still considered Luo Nan's experimental progress. She didn't act based on her own likes and dislikes. Her Majesty Empress Wu really taught her well. She was much better than a certain someone who fell in love with her when things went wrong. Cough. Luo Nan reflected on himself and encouraged himself. He grew more and more serious. It's precisely because it's useful that I will cherish it in the future. Let's have a chat right now. Are you really going to raise it after this matter is over? Zhang Yingying's entire body seemed to glow when she heard Luo Nan's words, which were practically a promise. Cough, that was an exaggeration. Her eyes glowed as she hurriedly declared, "Of course I'm going to raise it. Of course I'm going to raise it. It wasn't easy for me to raise it. I'm definitely going to continue raising it." She saw that Luo Nan was about to speak again, so she simply extended her palm. "I know you want to talk about the energy supply. You don't need to worry about this. I'll go find the boss and think of a way. Her Majesty Empress Wu wasn't a doryman. Luo Nan's retort got stuck in his throat. He swallowed it back with great difficulty, and he hurriedly used other words. That's not necessary. We can think of a way to satisfy both sides. Really? Zhang Yingying responded quickly. Her eyes grew brighter and brighter. She was extremely pleasantly surprised. Clearly, she wasn't that certain whether Her Majesty Empress Wu would draw her blade to help or simply draw her blade. Yeah. I just thought about it, and I have a new train of thought. It seems to be quite compatible with you. Taking advantage of Zhang Yingying's good mood, Luo Nan quickly thought through the words he had thought of in his mind. In the end, he cut the Gordian knot. Have you ever thought about letting Dumb Sand shed his body? Let his soul leave his body. Chapter 979. Ha! Zhang Yingying clearly didn't react in time. This clearly contradicted her usual direction of thought, or perhaps it was the ideal plan that she was looking forward to. So she was a bit muddled. She recovered with great difficulty and tried to understand. You mean? Why don't you tell me about it? Of course, this wasn't a problem. Luo Nan was used to lecturing. He casually condensed water vapor in the air to write on the blackboard. Didn't I say it before? Your extraordinary power is extraordinarily suitable for nurturing. This is helpful in nurturing the sand demon. Yes, it's Dumb Sand's instinctive life form. That's the general situation. Luo Nan had just drawn a few configuration diagrams when he suddenly felt that it was inappropriate. He waved his hand and scattered them. A portion of Dumb Sand's current good state was indeed nourished by Zhang Yingying's extraordinary power. There were a few things worth talking about, but if he continued talking about it, it would be tantamount to probing the fundamental characteristics of Zhang Yingying's extraordinary power. It really wasn't appropriate to display it in this environment. The blackboard writing was erased, but the model in Luo Nan's mind was still there. It was hard not to be puzzled. It was the same old question. Based on these characteristics, Zhang Yingying should be similar to Brother Papercut, the type that leaned toward support. If her thinking could keep up with configuration, she would be a good seedling for the school of fantasy, especially when it came to simulating life. But how could she possibly have a killing ability like White Rainbow? Could it be that my segmentation and reorganization aren't there yet, and I've overlooked a certain key structure? Luo Nan felt that it was necessary to discuss this matter with Her Majesty Empress Wu. He wouldn't say it right now, as it would only cause confusion. In fact, Zhang Yingying was already a bit impatient. She urged him over and over, hurry up and get to the point. I don't understand it anyway. Just announce the answer. It was impossible for Luo Nan to directly say the answer. He had to let Zhang Yingying understand the gist of it. This is what I'm thinking. Dumb Sand is indeed an artificial creation designed at the last minute. Its life solvent is simulated. It doesn't have a material foundation, so it can't be considered a true life. However, its value lies in the fact that it can form a second end of the life layer on the basis of these simulated configurations. Of course, it also has your nourishment. It achieves the effect of being driven by desire, and it continues to grow. If we can maintain this momentum and allow it to continue optimizing and evolving, in theory, we can develop a third, fourth, and finally perfect interference mechanism of the life layer. By then, in a sense, it will be a life. But you have to understand that this is only a theoretical possibility. Zhang Yingying started to get into the zone. She became calmer and calmer, and her mind became clearer. I know, I can't possibly have so much energy supply. The various consumptions required are also astronomical figures, right? Luo Nan nodded. That's right. Zhang Yingying's gaze circled around Silly Sand again. When she turned back, she couldn't help but feel a little more expectant. What about maintaining the status quo? I think it's pretty good now. This is a complex system. Who has ever seen a system that doesn't make mistakes? Especially when it was exposed to a complicated environment and had a very close relationship with you. Any slight change in these aspects could lead to a complete collapse in the end. Luo Nan slightly evaded Zhang Yingying's gaze and looked at Silly Sand. If I was by your side, Her Majesty Empress, we should be able to fix it in time. But the more time passes, the related configurations will continue to combine and mutate. The system will become more and more complex, and the problems will become more and more violent. A moment of carelessness will cause problems to erupt in the time you take a nap. You won't even have time to react. Zhang Yingying went silent when she heard this. A few seconds later, she suddenly laughed. I forgot. I told you to just say the answer. Luo Nan laughed as well, and he spoke a bit faster. There are many difficult checkpoints in my thoughts, but I won't go into the specifics. My basic train of thought is that we shouldn't focus on the life layer. It has an innate flaw, and it is destined to have no future to speak of. We can start with Silly Sand's relatively good foundation of a super configuration. We can use a few methods that spoil things to help them grow, and we can forcefully raise its mechanism of existence in the life layer to the fantasy layer. Zhang Yingying couldn't help but feel a bit dizzy when she heard the answer. She tried to organize her thoughts. You're saying, from the life layer to the fantasy layer. Is it the leap you're talking about? It's far from reaching the qualifications to leap. That's why I said to spoil things to help them grow. But we can also connect it with cultivation in reality. Many of the mental side's life mechanisms aren't all that perfect, but aren't they still able to leave their bodies? It's not much at all, okay? Don't use your special experience to cover the general domain. Forget it. Continue. Zhang Yingying gave up struggling. Luo Nan continued to speak honestly. From what I can see, the difficulty isn't bad. Its current mechanism of existence, its primary perception, desires, and experience structure, is 1,000 times, 10,000 times simpler than that of humans. We just need to build a bridge, or perhaps a compiler, to push it to the mental plane. We can let it live in the sea of the mind as a unique life form. Zhang Yingying couldn't help but widen her eyes. There's such a method. You want it to directly become an immortal. When that happens, will Silly Sand still be Silly Sand? Why wouldn't it be? The bridge is also in the sense of configuration. For example, it's the same as flipping a card. Silly Sand's form is flipped from the material plane to the mental plane, but it's still a card. Of course it's done this way. Its existence isn't much higher than it is right now. It's a bit like a ghost or something. But it saves a lot of trouble. It can attach itself to the edge of your soul strength to charge. It's similar to adding a pendant to your cage. Of course it can also fly freely. It can live and die by itself in the sea of the mind. As long as it can learn to absorb energy from the outside world on the mental plane, it can constantly search for a suitable survival mechanism for itself. It will have the opportunity to continue growing stronger. When it's powerful to a certain degree, you can even summon it from the mental plane to the material plane. You can temporarily bestow it with some kind of material carrier. Its origin is sand. Sand is the best. Mud is fine too. Let it interfere with the material plane. Speaking of which, I originally wanted to recommend this method to Brother Papercut. If, and I'm saying if, it can break through a few critical checkpoints and enter the next level, then it can enter the abyss region from the sea of the mind and finally solidify. Entering the abyss area from the spiritual sea and finally solidifying was basically a perfect state. Most likely, more abilities would be developed. There's a special name for this type of life form. It's called fantasy breed. Luo Nan said so much in a single breath. This was tantamount to simplifying the heavenly Yuan Empire's definition of fantasy breeds to the extreme. He even secretly swapped out some of the core and explained it to Zhang Yingying. Of course, fantasy breeds weren't that simple. They didn't have the luck and fortune of the right time and place. They didn't have the faith of millions and millions of people to rely on. They didn't have the perfect structure to carry the load and sustain the changes. How could they become fantasy breeds? What Luo Nan said was just a path of artificial fantasy breeds from the school of fantasy. From the information given to him by Lieutenant Go Yi, there were quite a few similar creations during the peak of the school of fantasy. Right now, he was actually following this path. He was carrying out an extremely crucial experimental step, and dumb sand was closely related to it. As for the success rate, it should be quite good. Otherwise, wouldn't the school of fantasy not live up to its name? Luo Nan actually had the intention of delaying the enemy by bringing out this method. This was because there was still a period of adjustment to follow. Let's do it this way. Ha! Luo Nan was still pondering over how he should continue to persuade her and how he should make Zhang Yingying cooperate. He never expected her to be this straightforward, directly making the decision. Zhang Yingying's reasoning was sufficient and powerful. Dumb sand was originally created by you. There is no one under the heavens who understands it better than you. As long as you don't engage in segmented research, human destruction, and the like, then of course whatever you say will go. If you say it like that, then Luo Nan let out a breath of relief. He had only spoken halfway when Zhang Yingying suddenly rushed forward and grabbed him by the collar with enormous strength. Fortunately, Luo Nan's soul strength was constantly recovering. His long-range projection technique was excellent, and his foundation with the condensation ring was solid. This fake water vapor body was not directly crushed by this one grab. However, the visual impact brought about by the face that was practically right in front of his eyes made Luo Nan instinctively raise his hands to show his innocence. Zhang Yingying didn't think too much. She stared at Luo Nan's pupils, which were practically unable to see any traces of falsehood. She exerted a great deal of strength, seemingly piercing through space and time to transmit her will to Luo Nan's body several thousand kilometers away. I can understand your difficulties, but I hope you can understand my willfulness. Let's not deceive each other, okay? Frankly speaking, Luo Nan didn't know why Zhang Yingying was so concerned about dumb sand. The so-called oxytocin secretion didn't seem like a joke at all. But how could he possibly refuse when faced with this sort of face and this sort of attitude? I understand. We'll work hard together to complete this matter. I'm sure. Luo Nan originally wanted to say, I'm confident, but he changed his words when the words reached his mouth. But he did have a certain amount of confidence. This was because in the worst-case scenario, he could still give Zhang Yingying a trip ahead of time. It was better to speak less of such words right now. Luo Nan was just stating the facts. We can't gamble right now. We still need to nurture dumb sand for a period of time. We need to wait until the system of its super configuration becomes more stable. The embryonic virtual life forms level becomes clearer and more useful as a marker. We also need to consider the work of building bridges and flipping cards. As long as we can successfully push it to the mental plane, our chances of success will be higher. During this time, you can also learn some basic knowledge about fantasy configurations. You can make preparations for the brand new husbandry model in the future. You have this talent. I'm certain. Luo Nan spoke these last words from the bottom of his heart. There was not the slightest bit of discount or exaggeration. Chapter 980. The matter of dumb sand's future adoption came to an end. Zhang Yingying revealed a bright smile. It was as if she had erased all her worries. She ran to the edge of the formatting domain and loudly cheered Dumb Sand on. Because of the scene just now, the live broadcast viewers from all over the world seemed to be gossiping. This was nothing to Zhang Yingying and Luo Nan. Well, Luo Nan simply didn't know. His mind was completely focused on Zeolite Beach. In the following period of time, he needed to realize his own experimental designs and goals, and he also needed to accept Zhang Yingying's request. Though the tasks had increased, he did not feel that it was hard. He did not feel that it was an additional burden. This was indeed the case. In terms of super configuration, the experimental steps he was about to do did not fundamentally conflict with helping Dumb Sand's soul leave his body. The two were closely related to each other. At most, Dumb Sand, the little white mouse he had created, had the position of a biological son reserved for someone else. Another identity was added, and Dumb Sand needed to be carefully protected. He did not want to accidentally crush Dumb Sand to death. He absolutely had to remember this. Luo Nan emphasized this a few times in his mind and went to look at Dumb Sand. Unlike Zhang Yingying's purely emotional attention, what appeared in Luo Nan's eyes was never a simple individual or an ant colony. It was more like a specific character in a play he directed. Before the label of Zhang Yingying's biological son was attached, there was already an extremely concrete position. It was not just Dumb Sand. Everyone on Zeolite Beach other than Zhang Yingying was no exception. Right now, it was approximately 1 in the afternoon in D City. The flow of time seemed to be growing faster and faster. Luckily, Luo Nan could sense that the order on Zeolite Beach was in the process of accelerating its formation according to his original design. With Shinhe at the center, more than 30 experiment equipment were scattered in various locations on the beach, taking up the largest area. The syncopators, which had been supplemented, were like hundreds of clamps that clamped the void and split curtain above their heads into a hole. Luo Nan knew that Shinhe and the others wished to break away from all syncopators. They wanted to be able to allow the formatting domain, which was not restricted by the dynamo core, to exist normally. But unfortunately, it was basically impossible for them to reach this level. It wasn't that Luo Nan was holding back. It was just that they didn't understand what sort of environmental state this sandy terrain, which Luo Nan had single-handedly created, represented. Without personally participating in that dream, without living, fighting, and struggling in that kind of environment, they were destined to be separated by a layer of unbreakable cognitive barrier. Not to mention that the other two blocks that were in a state of confrontation were still hidden and complicated reserved spaces. Therefore, they had already trampled through many gullies and piles of sand that Luo Nan had personally dug. That was why they played the game of you run and I run with Dumb Sand. They never thought of encircling, intercepting, repelling, and annihilating Dumb Sand. Luo Nan didn't mind this at all. He also had no intention of publicizing his tense, unique, and miraculous experience to more people. There were some links that couldn't be left to others. They had to go through his own hands, and only his own hands. After making a rough estimation, he slowly walked towards the formatting domain on the beach. Everyone on the beach, as well as the live stream viewers who were staring at the beach, were still very sensitive even after 3 or 4 hours of indoctrination and torture. They suddenly became nervous. Even Zhang Yingying, who was wholeheartedly cheering for her own son, subconsciously gave Luo Nan a shot. Luo Nan took the opportunity to point at her from a distance. Be careful. Stay a bit further away. Fuck, was he going to make a big move? Luo Nan's path just so happened to pass by Hood's vicinity. This captain, who was the most powerful on the beach and had the most advanced dynamo core implanted, could not help but feel his heart twitch. Right now, Hood was already acting according to Luo Nan's arrangements. He had completely become an outstanding valve, assisting the main axis, Shinhe. He adjusted the fluctuating energy of the 30 or so burners, allowing them to establish a strict and free domain in this area that wasn't all that vast. He believed that he had already done quite well. Compared to the trembling Shinha, he was already able to move freely within the formatting domain. He was able to find a few key nodes and carry out preemptive adjustments. He could even restart the mission assigned by the laboratory, sending back all sorts of monitoring and sensing data in an unending stream, assisting the other side to carry out some hidden tests remotely. But when Luo Nan walked past him, Hood could not help but be stimulated. He straightened his body to maintain the most standard and most rigid posture. Luo Nan ignored him. He just waved his hand at Zhang Yingying from a distance. "Don't mind stupid sand. He's useful." This made Hood wake up from his stupor. The realization from earlier floated up in his mind once more. Everyone on the beach, including the things, were all designed by the person who just walked past. Now, it was finally time to activate it. Hold on. All sorts of distracting thoughts flashed through Hood's mind. Only now did he discover that Luo Nan had already entered. This person had long since entered the range of the formatting domain. There were no traces of the format of fire operating on his body. He was like a tourist taking a stroll on the beach, his gaze casually sweeping across various locations. He looked very little at the people, but he looked a lot at the scenery. Hood did not find it strange that Luo Nan had the ability to enter and exit as he pleased. After all, this was something that Luo Nan had single-handedly created. The 100 or so centimeters that buzzed and floated above his head were the symbol of Luo Nan's strength. It was just that he was currently shouldering the heavy responsibility of monitoring Luo Nan. One of the most important tasks was to make a good record of Luo Nan's state when Luo Nan was in close contact with the formatting domain for future research. Hood subconsciously followed Luo Nan, but he felt that he was being impulsive the moment he took a step forward. Sure enough, Luo Nan stopped in front of him and turned his head to look over. Hood was extremely embarrassed. He never expected Luo Nan to nod. "Come on then. There's something I need to arrange." Okay." Hood did not have the courage to refuse at all. He took 2 quick steps and followed behind Luo Nan. Luo Nan did not give him a direct order. Instead, he turned his head and walked forward. He was neither fast nor slow. Looking at the direction, it seemed that he wanted to go to the edge of the beach. There was a sports car parked there. It seemed to belong to Meng Chong of the Blood Flame Order. That fellow had been gone for a few hours. Who knew what he was up to? Weren't the two going to meet later? What was Luo Nan doing? Was he shaking people? Hood's thoughts fluctuated in his mind, but he was unable to grasp the main point. Right now, he was hoping that the special communication channel would give him clear instructions. But the other side seemed to be worried that Luo Nan would discover them. They entered a state of silence. Luo Nan walked all the way to the sports car before stopping. Hood stopped when Luo Nan stopped. Hood's eyes were sharp. He noticed that a large circle was clearly drawn on the sand beneath the sports car. It was very orderly, encircling the entire car within. No area protruded out. B. Headquarters. The first few words were a bit vague. Luo Nan stood outside the circle and pointed at the car. The beach might be a bit messy, but it might not be that messy. In any case, you guys absolutely cannot allow any shockwaves to enter this circle and harm this car. So you really want to be a demon? Go say these words to the main axis. These were Hood's first 2 thoughts. This was also the root of his arrogance. The problem was that he displayed it outwardly, so he could only nod obediently. In the end, he felt that it wasn't enough, so he repeated himself. This is the headquarters. We absolutely cannot allow any shockwaves to enter the circle and harm the sports car. Luo Nan nodded. He turned around and gazed into the distance toward the ocean. Hood copied him and turned around. From this position, he could see the entire beach. He could see everything at a glance. Hood confirmed once more that the overall layout of the beach had certainly gone through special planning. The Deep Blue Walker experimental machine, which was countless generations behind, was parked at the end of the beach. Its position just so happened to be in the direction the sports car was pointing. The two formed a central axis, dividing the beach into two halves. In addition, there were a few undulating piles of sand and gullies. They shouldn't have been randomly arranged. They were distributed in disorder, giving off a rather layered feeling. They formed an even more detailed layout structure. As for where the marvels lay, Luo Nan was unable to discern them in a short amount of time. He could only do his best to record these things and transmit them to the rear so that they could analyze and interpret them. However, the problem right now was that the originally neat layout had become exceptionally messy because of the several dozen burners. Should I go pile up sand next? Huda wasn't unhappy about this. It would be great if he could seize this opportunity to grasp a few key structures and techniques. Luo Nan didn't issue any similar orders after waiting for a while. Instead, he thought of something else and added, "Stupid sand crossing the line won't do either." Ha! Hood was at a loss. He followed Luo Nan's line of sight and looked at stupid sand, which was still 100 meters away. With that thing's speed, it would take an hour to force its way over even if it didn't change its anchoring direction. Was this a mockery? Oh, it won't be able to crawl over in a short amount of time. However, we need to set up a boundary in front of us. Luo Nan's voice had just fallen when an incorporeal force suddenly took effect in the coastal area of the beach, about 30 meters behind the Deep Blue Walker exoskeleton. A portion of the sand slowly caved in, revealing a gully that was 10 meters long, half a meter deep, and about the width of a palm. It was perpendicular to the central axis formed by the sports car and the exoskeleton. That area just so happened to be a relatively densely populated area. There were a few burners nearby, and they were adjusting their positions in order to adapt to the formatted domain. One of them was overly nervous when encountering such an unforeseen event. His energy was misaligned, and he suffered a backlash from the domain. Arcs of light whipped him, and the others around him suffered a calamity as a dazzling ball of light exploded. No matter what was said, Hood had a role as a valve. Even though he didn't have any direct subordinates over there, it still made him lose face. He subconsciously said, "Professor Luo, don't blame me. These cowards lack training. I didn't expect you to have a particularly high level. Time doesn't allow for it." Hood vaguely remembered that Luo Nan planned to board a ship at 3 or 4 in the afternoon and leave T-City. This meant that, what the hell was I worrying about? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.